Okay, and good afternoon and welcome to the Online Readers Advisory Seminar 2021. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which each of us are on. I'm on Dharawal country. I pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other First Nations people. I celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal cultures and languages across Australia. Thank you all for joining us. We have over 100 library members from across the state joining us this afternoon, as well as someone from Texas. So, my name is Monique Akawala and I work at Sutherland Shire Libraries. I would like to now share how this afternoon's program will work. While I explain, you're invited to introduce yourselves in chat, sharing your name, your library name and the name of the Aboriginal people who are the traditional owners of the land your library is on, although a lot of people have done this already. Firstly, it would be appreciated if you could turn off your video and mute yourself during the presentations. As you've seen in the program, we're also hosting breakout rooms each afternoon of the seminar. These breakout rooms have been created to offer the opportunity for smaller groups of people to discuss the presentations and answer some prepped questions. Each break room will be facilitated by someone from the Readers Advisory Committee. It would be great if you could unmute yourselves for the breakout sessions, or if you prefer, you can just use the chat to make comments. You don't have to do anything to join the breakout room sessions. Everyone will be assigned to a breakout room by Ellen, and at the end of the session, you'll be returned to the main Zoom. So let's get started. I'm delighted to be introducing Angela Hurst from Novelist, who is telling us the $1 million reason you should market the collection and how to do it. So welcome, Angela, to the library, or to our seminar. Thank you.
I wish I was at the library. Thank you so much. That's so sweet of you. I know it's kind of sad, but here we are, and we're going to have fun. Thank you very much. I'm so honored to be here this afternoon. It's afternoon for you and it's evening for me, and you should be seeing the first slide. Can you give me a thumbs up or let me know if that's what you're seeing? And if so, I'm going to continue onward. My talk begins today with a little bit of housekeeping, because if you're like me, you come to a presentation and you learn a lot of things, and then you go back to your library and you put them into practice, but sometimes you have questions that you may not have thought of during the presentation, and that's totally fine. I wanted to share my email address with you, so it's on the screen right now. Go ahead and jot it down. I know Ellen will have it also afterwards if you need it from her. Just feel free to let me know at any time if you have any questions about what we talk about today or any library marketing in particular. I'm also on social media. My handle is Webmaster Girl, except for on LinkedIn, where I'm under my real name. And this presentation involves some talk about social media. So if you want to live tweet during the presentation while you're eating your lunch, that's totally acceptable. I would love it if you use the hashtag library marketing. So after I'm done, I can go back and see what you said and maybe answer some of your tweets. So that would be really awesome. And we are going to take questions after the presentation today. So if you have a question at any point, just go ahead and put it into the chat and we will answer them at the end. So I wanted to introduce you today to a woman who really affected my life. Her name is Bertha, and she's 103 years old. And she is a patron of the library where I used to work. So I work at Novelist now, but before I worked at Novelist, I was the content team leader for the marketing department at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County here in Cincinnati, Ohio in the US. And my library would come once a week before COVID to the assisted living facility where Bertha was living. And we would bring a bunch of books. They had a little library set up in her assisted living facility. And so every week we would switch out the books that were there, and the folks who lived in that facility could check out books. And I got a chance to interview Bertha about that exchange. She was reading 3 books a week at 103 years old. And this particular quote that you see on the screen just really stuck with me, because this is why I think many of us do the job that we do in libraries. We are trying to foster a lifelong love of learning and a lifelong love of books. And whoever started doing this with Bertha when she was a young person really hit it on the nail. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to talk about ways to foster this kind of engagement today so that you can have patrons like Bertha who are engaging and using your library all through their lives. And I really think that collection marketing is essential for your library's success. So I spent 7 years working, like I said, at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, and we did a ton of collection marketing. And we did it because of the two figures that you see on the screen right now. That is the spread, budget-wise, pre-COVID, between the amount my library spent on programming and the amount they spent on the collection. Now, it's a large metropolitan library. It serves a big county of about 1 million residents. We had something like 600,000 plus patrons. So it's a pretty big budget. We were blessed in that way. But you can see that we spent many, many times more on our collection than on our programming. And I bet if you checked your library, you would find that you are spending more on things like books and movies and music than you do on programs. And it just goes for me to think that why do libraries spend so much time and energy promoting programs when this is where their budget is? Now, I want you to understand that I'm not saying that programs aren't valuable for a library. They are an incredibly important part of our mission. We serve the community with our programs. They deserve to be marketed. But the point is that most library teams are spending the majority of their time and energy promoting programs. And I think that they're missing a really important fact about library usage. And that is that library cardholders want stuff, items to check out. They're checking out books. They're watching videos online, they're listening to music, they're listening to audiobooks. They want the items. That's why they signed up for a library card. And this isn't just conjecture on my part. We have some real data to back this up. The Australia Council for the Arts did a 3-year study on the preference, behaviors, and attitudes of Australians towards books and reading, and I found their findings to be really amazing. They found that Australians value and enjoy reading and would like to do it more often, which is fantastic news for libraries. In fact, reading books ranked higher than browsing the internet or watching television as the leisure activity Australians enjoy the most, which is astounding and great news again for your library. The majority of Australians believe that books have a value that is greater than their monetary cost. And they're finding new books to read mainly through word of mouth, which is where great reading suggestions from your library are going to come in. Before the pandemic, we had a finding that really just honestly blew my mind, frankly. Australians are reading more books than book sales alone suggest. So in other words, that means your community is reading as many borrowed books as purchased books. So again, fantastic news for your library. And this is why collection marketing, particularly in your area, is really going to just reinforce and make that value to be even bigger for your library. So also the New South Wales State Library did an annual report, they do one every year, on public library statistics, and your library had 34 million physical visits just before the pandemic in 2019. But it's 2019. This study was published in June of 2020. So it'll be really interesting to see what the stats are for this year. But before the pandemic, 34 million visits, 40 million loans. So more loans than visits, which is awesome. And ebook loans increased 84% over the previous 5 years. So from 2014 to 2019, you got an 84% increase in the amount of ebooks that were checked out. Can you imagine what that number is going to be next year after the pandemic? It's going to be out of this world. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these statistics change for 2020. But there are some things that we don't really need a report like this to tell us. So there's, as we said, it's been a statewide rise in ebook borrowing since the pandemic. And your communities have been really quick to take advantage of services like click and collect that you're offering. The continuous extensions and renewals that your libraries have offered are also really helping to make sure your readers are getting the books that they want, even when they can't access your physical building the way they used to. And we do have some data actually on weekly ebook lending across Australia. This is a new report that was released just last month by Overdrive, which is a big ebook provider in Australia and the US. And they show that ebook and audiobook lending has increased by 41% in 2020. That's a higher number than in the US. I think it was 34% in the US. So no surprise there, I'm sure, to those of you who are working in libraries. I know you know what your patrons want and what they check out. And if you ask your patrons why they got a library card, most of them are going to tell you it's because they're excited to check the stuff out. I think in the library world, we sometimes take it for granted that people know that we have circulation items. And for me, that makes me nervous. I think that's a little bit dangerous because it actually threatens the future of libraries. If we want to compete with Amazon and other bookstores, we have to promote our main asset, which is our collection. So before I worked at the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County, I actually had another career. I worked as a television news producer. And that means I basically put together every night's newscast, kind of decided what stories were going to be told, in what order, who was going to do the reporting. So every year, our news director would bring in a consulting firm to the news station, and their job was to help the producers improve our shows and, of course, increase our viewership and our ratings. Now, I was very proud of my work as a journalist, and but I always thought that, you know, I did the news and it was a great thing and I was doing something good for the world. But when I got the feedback from those focus groups of viewers, it was an eye-opening experience because it was pretty clear while they thought it was great to get the news of the day, most of them were coming to watch my show because of the weather. So it was nice to know what the news of the day was, but what they really wanted to know was if it was going to rain or snow the next day, if they needed to send their kids to the bus stop in a coat, if they needed an umbrella. So that was a pretty eye-opening experience. So in the TV worlds, we always say weather is king. And in libraries, the collection is king. And that really means that it's the cornerstone of your libraries. Books are your brand, and collection marketing is really a valuable investment for every library, both in budget and in time. So I hope when you leave today's session, you will, if you're not already doing it, that you're going to be inspired to start collection marketing right away, even if you've never done any kind of promotional or marketing work before. We're going to talk about 3 easy ways to promote your collection. That's email, social media, and in print. I'm going to share some tips that are really easy to execute. They're fun, actually. They're going to work no matter what size your library is. And I'm here to tell you, if your library spends a few minutes every day promoting your collection, you will be increasing circulation and reinforcing the image of your library as a place of vast resources in the eyes of your cardholders and your community. Now, I know you love your job and you take it very seriously. I've seen a lot of libraries who really want to start doing some concerted collection marketing, but then they shy away from it because they're afraid of failure. So I've got a new motto for you here on the screen. I want you to just take 5 seconds and recite it to yourself. This is fun. I am experimenting. If I fail, I'll just try again. All right, you are ready to go. So let's dive in. The first thing that you need to do when you're thinking about collection marketing is to define your goals. And goals are an absolute necessity. If you want to have any promotional success, you really need to define what it is you want to do specifically. Where are you now and where do you want to be? Do you want to increase circulation? If so, by how much do you want to increase it? Are you looking to boost the use of a certain part of your collection, like maybe a certain section of your digital materials? Maybe you want to drill down a little further and focus on things like just downloadable audiobooks or downloadable magazines. You're going to set some goals and you're going to use numbers and say specifically how you're going to measure your results. And you must write it down. So why do I ask you to write it down? Surveys show that successful marketers write their goals down on paper. So I know it sounds silly, but that very simple step is going to help you to remember what you're doing, and it's going to keep you accountable. And with everything that you do in library marketing, your collection marketing goals should be in service of advancing your library's overall goals. So I want to just take a moment and acknowledge that COVID has probably taken your library's overall goals and turned it on their heads. So if that's the case for your library, and you're not really sure where your library overall is going to be going over the next year or so, there are a couple of things that you can do right now to achieve some short-term collection marketing goals, even if you're open for limited service, or maybe you're working with fewer staff than you're used to. First, I want you to think again about what your library is doing right now in terms of promoting your collection. And then I want you to think about, of those things that you're doing, what is your audience actually responding to? So for instance, if you're posting about books or collection items on Facebook, are you getting a lot of likes or shares or comments around a particular genre or a particular type of item? Do people really love it when you share new books on Twitter? If you're promoting new books on your website, either new or from your backlist, is there a certain genre or a theme that your readers really respond to most? So those are little nuggets of things that you can use to start your collection marketing. Now, the company that I work for, Novelist, has a product called Library Aware that helps libraries with their marketing. And we have templates for all kinds of collection marketing materials. And I don't want to be a salesy person. I just want to let you know that I have a way of looking at the templates so that I can kind of check and see what it is that libraries are looking for in terms of doing collection marketing. And that just kind of gives us an idea of what patrons around the world are asking for right now. So this morning, I took a quick peek into templates that some of our Australia clients are doing. And as you can see, there are two different templates that are centered around new fiction for teens and adults. And to me, this makes a lot of sense because I think during this time, readers are kind of looking for an escape. So all these little nuggets of data tell you something about your reading audience. And if you know that your patrons love a particular kind of book, you can take that and run with it in terms of promotion. Give them more of what they want. So let's say that your audience loves new ebooks and you've decided to focus your collection marketing on that particular format. You're going to want to set a goal with a real number. So an example would be, we'll increase circulation of new mystery and science fiction ebooks by 10%. Or maybe you are looking to increase the use of your pickup service for holds that you call click and collect. So you can put a number to that. We'll increase use of our click and collect services by 25%. When you decide on a measurable goal, again, you're going to write it down because that goal is going to remind you every day of what you're working on. It's going to make you accountable for the results and you're more likely to succeed. Then you're going to ask yourself 2 more questions before you actually get into creating any promotional materials. You want to figure out who is going to do the work of collection marketing and how much time that person or the group of people can commit to collection marketing. And this might seem obvious, but I want you to be intentional about finding the answers to those questions because too often I see libraries assign marketing to someone without really taking any time or putting any thought into how that staff member is going to make room in their schedule to do the actual work. Or the library might just assume that everyone on the staff is going to help with collection marketing. And then it turns out no one does because nobody knows whose job it is, or they think someone else is doing it. So I want you again to be more intentional and assign someone or a group of staffers specifically to this task and make room in their schedule for it. So if you're the person at your library who is assigned to do the collection marketing already, perhaps, you can sit down and figure out exactly how long it takes you to do things like make the promotional items on social, like social media posts, or put together an email or create a bookmark, and how long it will take you to look at the results after the promotion is done to see if it's successful. Then I want you to let your supervisor know that, so that everyone is open and transparent and we know how much time this is going to take. All right, I want to talk about the fun part of collection marketing, which is what are you going to promote and how are you going to find books to promote? So I've got some examples up here on the screen. These are some very popular things that people from our libraries who are novelist clients promote in collections. So new books, obviously, really popular. Read-alikes. The beauty of read-alikes is that you are giving your patrons something that keeps them engaged with your library while they're waiting for their hold or waiting for a book to come in on the new book list. And those are books that are going to be connected in some way through story elements or through theme to the book that they're really waiting for, the new book. But again, it just keeps them engaged with the library, and it's a great thing to use as a promotional tool. Next Reads is a product of LibraryAware. So if your library is a LibraryAware client, you get access to Next Reads, which is like reading recommendations that are emailed every month. You can also do collection marketing that's genre specific or age specific. You can do other kinds of collection marketing. So that's things like your book club reads. That's absolutely a collection marketing. If you have music and streaming video, I count those also as collection marketing because normally those come out of the collection budget. So go ahead and promote those. They don't have to be books. You're just promoting all parts of your collection. I also put any kind of reader's advisory service. So if you have on your website or in some other form, a form that people can fill out and then you'll give them some personalized reading suggestions, that is also a form of collection marketing and counts as collection marketing. So those are all fun things that you can do to promote your attention or collection. So some more ideas for how to get items to promote for collection marketing. You're going to want to pay attention to book pop culture and promote items that are getting a lot of media or critical buzz. So the way I personally do this is to listen to a bunch of podcasts by librarians talking about books. One of my favorite things to do. I clean my house every weekend and I spend those few hours listening to librarians talk about books, and then I run over to my computer and put things on hold really quick in between dusting my house or vacuuming. You all here are very blessed because you have a lot of podcasts available to you. And those include the Book Show from ABC Radio National, Books, Books, Books from the Copyright Agency's Cultural Fund, and the Australian Book Review Podcast. All three are great. I listen to episodes. You should listen to them if you're not already. If your library has Novelist or Novelist Plus, which many of you do, you can use the media mentions function to track new titles that have gotten some buzz on popular radio and TV programs. And on this particular slide, I put an orange arrow so you can see where the media mentions function is on the entire annotation for this book, which is Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. So you can just look and see that this book has been mentioned on CBC Radio Canada in January. And that's a really fun way to do promotions. There's actually a library here in the US that goes through novelists and pulls all of the books that have had a mention in some form of media during the past month. And then they create an e-newsletter and send it out to their patrons. And they were like, this book was mentioned on this show, and this book was mentioned on this show. And they have a link to each of those books to their catalog. It's a form of social proof, and it prompts people to put a hold in the catalog on those books because they want to get in on the action too. There are also a lot of really great YouTube channels where librarians are taking some advanced reader copies and reviewing them. So much fun to watch. You can also find advanced reviews on Goodreads if you're looking for what's coming up. Publishing houses like Penguin often do live Facebook live streams with reviewers who talk about their latest releases. Sometimes they even have the authors on the live stream. So if you hear of an avid reader of any kind that person's getting really interested about a book that's coming out, you know that's a book that you're probably going to want to do a little bit of collection marketing around. Because if one person is excited about it, there's going to be a larger audience that will be excited about it. I am a believer in paying attention to the cover of a book as a promotional tool. So I know it sounds silly, but I swear to you it works. When I worked in the library in Cincinnati, whenever I sent an email to my card holders with some book suggestions, I always was intentional about trying to pick good books, but ones that also had a bright or colorful or interesting cover. And I found that the more visually pleasing the cover of the book was, the higher the circulation numbers would be. A successful book cover really grabs people on first look, especially when the book is in a digital format and you're trying to promote it in another digital format like an email. You want it to pop when a person opens that email. It has to catch their eye. Same thing if they're scrolling by on social media, it has to catch their eye. So that's not saying on this slide that the cover on the left is a bad cover. It clearly has a connection to the subject of the book. But if you're looking at these two covers in an email, the one on the right is going to draw your attention first. Publishers understand the psychological impact of a book cover. They spend a whole ton of money and a lot of research to pick the most engaging cover. And I think that libraries can use that to their advantage when we're choosing our items to promote. Another idea is to let someone else pick the books that you're going to promote for your collection. So when I worked in Cincinnati, I periodically asked the library staff for reading recommendations. Librarians love that when you ask them for suggestions. I also had a lot of success asking customers for their reading suggestions. I did a campaign for Teen Read Week where I asked teens to recommend books that they thought other teens should read. And it worked out really well. It was better, like the year that I switched to asking teens to recommend books for other teens. The year before that, I had asked librarians to tell me book recommendations for teens. There was something about the fact that teens were getting recommendations from other kids their age that made them more likely to check those books out. So, and it meant I didn't have to do the work. So that worked out really well. So you can ask people to make reading suggestions for you, even the patrons of your library. Again, if you have Novelist Plus, we have lots of reading recommendations for fiction and nonfiction for all ages. We have read-alike recommendations, like we talked about earlier, that are crafted by our experts. We'll also let you know who wrote that recommendation and why they're recommending it, which is kind of cool to know. We offer recommendations for titles and authors and series. And Novelist Plus also has listen-alike recommendations for audiobooks. I am an audiobook lover, so that really appeals to me. We talk about books that are mentioned in some of the big journals like Library Journal. You can also find award-winning books and lots of reading lists that make really great content for your social media or email post. And again, that means you don't have to look those books up yourself, which is really nice. And again, if your library is a Library Wear subscriber, we have Next Reads newsletters that are full of book recommendations. And we have a trick for our Next Reads subscribers. We have an advanced list on Next Reads so you can get a heads up on hot titles that are coming into selection. And I like to just peek at that to see what's coming up so that I know what to recommend for libraries to promote in terms of collection. So you've got lots of ideas for what to promote. Let's spend some time talking about where to actually do those promotions. And as I mentioned earlier, there are three main places where you're going to be promoting your collection: social media, email, and in print. I'm going to begin with social media. I will say that there are, of course, a lot of social media platforms. Quite frankly, for collection marketing, I don't think one platform is better than another. Overall, in general, you can't generalize for social media. So you're going to think about your collection marketing on social media as a big experiment. Maybe for the first few months, if you haven't done this before, you're just going to play around and kind of see what the followers on each particular platform pay attention to. And your followers are going to respond to things differently than followers for another library in New South Wales. So it's going to be individual for your community, and you just have to kind of do it and see what people respond to. So maybe like the people who follow your Twitter, for example, you'll find that they're really into ebooks and mysteries. And maybe the people you'll find who follow your Facebook are really looking for children's books. And maybe the people who follow you on LinkedIn are really looking for self-help and career books. You're going to find all that out by actually just doing some work promoting your collection on those social platforms. So we're going to walk through some ideas for posts on collection marketing specific to social media. And then I'm actually going to share some of the latest tips on posting to social media for each platform. So social media post ideas. Obviously, book lists work really well on social media. You can see that Chappaqua did this book list recently with this week's new fiction. They put this together themselves. I'm also a really big fan of social media virtual book displays, especially right now when a lot of libraries are working on limited service. You want to be able to recreate that browsing experience for your patrons, and you can do that. Liverpool City Libraries did that here. I love their use of hashtags. I love their caption here. They even put an emoji in this caption. So they did a really great job of capturing the attention of their patrons on this Instagram post and kind of recreating that book display experience. Book memes. So collection marketing doesn't have to be promoting your books all the time. It can just be creating that feeling and reminding your readers why they love to read. And book memes are a lot of fun. They usually boost your engagement on your social platforms, which is going to help all of your other posts on that platform. So go ahead and have some fun on your social media platforms and get your readers talking about books, even if it's not about a specific title. Book unboxing videos. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This particular video, the link to it I sent to Ellen, so she's going to provide it to you either in the chat or later on. And you can watch this. This guy works at a school library, and he does a book unboxing video for new books that are coming into his school library. Now, I know books usually come one title in a box. My guess is that he takes all of them out and then puts them in another box all together and like tapes them up and then kind of goes through the process of unboxing them. It doesn't matter, the behind the scenes stuff. What matters is it's engaging and it's a fun way to introduce his students and the teachers at that school to all of the new books that have come into his collection. And I totally think that we can do that for public libraries as well. There's no reason not. So if you get that link, I highly encourage you to watch that video because it's a lot of fun. Again, we talk about letting somebody else do the work of collection marketing and just kind of tagging on them. So I use Brazoria County Library System. They're here in Texas, and they follow the Facebook pages of all of their vendors. So that's like Overdrive and Canopy and Freegal. They also follow a lot of pages that are centered on reading or authors, on book clubs, like Library Reads. And they'll share original Facebook content from those pages on their page. And they just add one simple line, which is, you can find this book in our catalog, and a link to their catalog. So easy, totally doesn't take any work on their part. They're just sharing a post. And that's something that you can replicate at your library. There's also a lot of libraries that are doing live stream reading recommendations. And one of the best that I found is the Hillsborough Public Library. I think they do it every 2 weeks. They have 2 librarians and a moderator, and they basically just get in front of the camera and they talk about new books coming in, read alikes, just they start giving reading recommendations to their patrons. And then they repost this video later so that they get additional engagement on their Facebook page. And it's kind of amazing. I have a link to that one too that I've sent to Ellen, so you can watch it later if you're interested. I also recommend that you ask either your library staff or your card holders to do some book reviews for you. They can just pull out their their phone camera and just shoot like 60 seconds. Why do you love this book? This is a private school here in America, but they got all these little cute little kids reviewing these fantastic children's books, and it is just adorable. Again, the link is with Ellen, and you can watch this video. It's very easy to replicate. You don't really have to do any editing. You can just pull out your phone. You can get free editing software for your phone and put those videos together. And it's just a super fun way to get some excitement and do some collection marketing around your library. And speaking of fun videos, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Clearwater Public Library System in Clearwater, Florida, here in the US. They have probably the best YouTube channel I've ever seen of a public library. And they have all kinds of amazing videos, but one of the ones that I love the most is this video of librarians reading 1-star reviews of their favorite books. It is hilarious. And you may think, how is that collection marketing? You're reminding people that these books are in the library. A lot of these books, again, this is a Lower X by Dr. Seuss, older book, classics. A lot of them are classics, but you're reminding people that your library has them and that they can come and check them out. You don't always have to focus all of your collection marketing on new titles. And Ellen has the link to this. You absolutely have to watch it. It is hilarious. So social media, let's talk for a little bit about platform-specific best practices for posting to social media. I will tell you that I updated this section of the presentation on Friday because the platform-specific best practices changed between the time I originally put this presentation together and Friday of last week. So social media changes frequently, about every couple of months, but this is the latest of what I know. And I'll tell you also that one of my favorite places to get news about social media is a website called Social Media Today. So if you just Google social media today, you'll be able to find it and see they've got articles every single day updating you on best practices for platforms. It's really the best way to stay on top of it. So I'm going to start with Facebook because that's the one that most libraries are using. Right now, the data shows us that posting twice a day is best on Facebook. Currently, the best time to post on Facebook is between 3 and 4 p.m. And we think that's because people start to get to the end of their workday or their school day and they get bored and they're just like, I'm going to check Facebook real quick. So that's the best time to post, between 3 and 4. Weekends are also really good to post on Facebook. The worst time to post on Facebook right now is during the work week before 2 p.m. On Instagram, you're going to want to post to your Instagram feed about 2 times a week. But you're going to want to post to Instagram stories, and that's the little circle icon that's at the very top when you open the app. You're going to want to post to Instagram stories every single day. So if you have to allocate your resources and you don't have a lot of time, I would suggest that you post to Instagram stories before you post to the feed. Focus your energy on stories more than on the feed because they're getting more engagement from stories. Instagram is telling us that they get the most interactions on Wednesdays, weekends, and in the evenings, which kind of makes sense. And of course, you're going to want to use hashtags on Instagram, and some good ones for collection marketing are hashtag book reviews and hashtag book recommendations. Twitter is active all the time. Right now, Twitter tells us that posting 3 times a day is optimal, which is really interesting. During the first couple months of the pandemic, it was just post all the time, keep posting, because our content was getting lost in the feed. The feed has kind of slowed down a little bit. So now they're telling us we only have to post 3 times a day, which is great. You get the most engagement on Twitter during times when people are commuting, which is kind of scary now that I say that out loud. Are they looking at it on their phones while they're driving? I hope they're taking public transport. Also, you get a lot of engagement during lunch. Same hashtags that work for Instagram also work for Twitter in terms of collection marketing. So book reviews and book recommendations work really well on Twitter. LinkedIn. You're probably like, what library is on LinkedIn? libraries are getting on LinkedIn, and I think it's a really good idea. If you're going to experiment with a platform, LinkedIn is really a great place to do it. LinkedIn is as you know, professionally oriented network. So it's not surprising that the most active time for us and the best time for us to post is during the weekdays. You're going to want to stay away from evenings and weekends on LinkedIn because people just aren't checking it. And most of the libraries that I know that are posting on LinkedIn are doing things like self-help books, career books, books about business, books about it. I said career books, but advancing your career, but also things like book clubs and film clubs. If you have those programs at your library, I don't know why, but they do really well on LinkedIn. I also have some anecdotal evidence that when we get back to the times where people can come to our library in person, and your library happens to have an exhibit of some kind, like an art exhibit or historical exhibit, those kinds of promotions work really well on LinkedIn too. So just something to keep in the back of your mind about LinkedIn. And Pinterest. Libraries are using Pinterest to promote their collection. And the best time to pin, this is actually the one platform where being specific about posting outside of working hours is recommended. And yes, you can do collection marketing on Pinterest. So think of Pinterest as a social media network, but also a search engine. So a lot of people come to Pinterest and look for books to read. They go there for their reading recommendations. So you can turn your popular books or maybe new books coming into your library into pins with direct links to your catalog, and you're going to see results in terms of circulation. So speaking of powerful promotional materials, let's switch gears now and talk about my personal favorite way to promote books in the collection, and that is through email. Now, you may be thinking that email is dead. No one reads their emails anymore, Angela. But I'm here to tell you that is not true, especially for libraries, and especially for libraries that are doing collection marketing through email. People really want to hear from us. When I worked in Cincinnati, I sent a lot of email, tens of thousands of emails every week. Again, I had a huge population, but I sent thousands and thousands of emails every week. And I'm not fibbing when I say that my unsubscribe rate was less than 0.1%. And that is because people want books. That's why they signed up to become a patron. So if you're sending them books and reading suggestions, that's what they want. They're going to engage with your emails, and they're not going to look at you as though you're spam. And email is actually one of the most efficient ways to do your collection marketing. You are actually 6 times more likely to get a click from an email than from a tweet. We have a study from a website called Chief Marketer that found that the return on investment on email was 28.5%. And that's compared to 7% for direct mail. So that's things like brochures, postcards, things that are sent through the mail. Email conversion rates are 3 times higher than conversion rates for social media. So that is kind of amazing. So again, if you have to think about allocating your resources in a place that is going to have the most benefit for your patrons, email is really the place to be. And I know that you're going to worry that people are going to think you're spam, and spam is the worst thing ever. But generally speaking, the way that consumers think about library email is not the same as the way they think about email from a company. So our cardholders love us and what we offer, and they want us to reach out to them. This is the biggest advantage we have over other industries. Most of our libraries at Novelist using Library Aware are right now sending anywhere from 1 email a month to 24 emails a month. And their unsubscribe rates are also less than 1%. And that's because people want what your library has to offer. They're eager to hear from you. So I want you to just let go of that fear of being spam and reach out to your cardholders with email. Now, there are a couple of important best practices to keep in mind when you're sending collection marketing emails. First is that your subject line is the most important part of the email message. So I want you to spend the most amount of time thinking about what you want that subject line to say, because it really gets your card holders in the door, and you're going to focus on sentiment and getting them to have an emotional reaction by using some emotional words. You're going to want to use different words for different audiences, and your subject line can be as long or as short as you want it to be, as long as it's simple. I've got two great examples here, one from the Bridges library system. This particular example did really well. They said, my library has what? They got great open rates, great click rates. Stark County Library also has a very exciting new adult fiction out next week. I mean, as for me as a reader, this is like the thing that makes me want to open it up, because I want to see what the new books are. I don't want to miss out on a new title that I might want to read. So again, it doesn't have to be super long or super complicated. It can be very simple. Just focus yourself on getting some intense emotional reactions, get them to react like, I don't want to miss out on this book, or asking a question is a really great idea too, just like Bridges did. Other email best practices, we're going to use text that sounds like a conversation. I don't want you to use industry words like periodicals or any kind of word that your library has made up for something. I want you to use whatever the word that your patrons would use for that collection item or service. Another important thing is to remember is that you don't have to convey all of the information that you want your email recipient to have in the body of the email. So you might want to just write a little bit of text and then drive your patron to their website, to your website for more information. You're going to want to mix text and images kind of evenly, because if you have too much text in your email, that can send a negative signal to some spam filters. So you want to kind of limit the text as much as you can. Of course, you'll choose images that complement the text. The purpose of the images is, again, to create an emotional reaction or set the mood of the email. It's there to inspire. It's not there to tell everybody everything you want them to know. You can use positive, active language in your call to action. And I like to put my calls to action in a little square box, because there's something about clicking on a square box that people love. It's kind of psychological. So you might want to think about doing that with your emails if you're able to do that. Some great calls to action are things like place a hold, get reading recommendations. You can even do one-word CTAs like download or read. Those are also very effective. And then you're going to target your message. Click rates skyrocket when the message that you send is targeted to the audience that's going to be most likely to be interested in it. And I know that sounds like common sense, but I hear from a lot of libraries who are afraid to stop sending emails to all of their card holders. If you can segment your audience, you should do so. And the easiest way to do that is to have people sign up so they can indicate to you what things are they interested in. You can do this when somebody signs up to for a card or to be a member of your library. You can ask people to fill out a survey, maybe a Google form, to list their interests. Small targeted audiences are better for email than all cardholder messages. And I wanted to use this as an example. This is the Williamsburg Regional Library in Virginia. They sent this email. They have I think their population is something like 150 to 200,000 people. They sent this email to only 151 people, but those are 151 people who we know have children who need children's books. And they were promoting their 1,000 books before kindergarten program. This email had an open rate of 71% and a click rate of 28%. Now you're probably like, what, is that good? There aren't any industry averages for libraries. So we have to compare ourselves to industries like government or nonprofit. We also have, at Novelist, we have our own data. So we know like what a good open rate is for our libraries. A good open rate is around 21 to 23%. So this one is way above that. A good click rate, and a click rate, in case you're wondering, is the number of people who click on something after they've opened the email. So they open it first, then they see something interesting like that URL there, and they click on the URL. 28% of the people did that. And that is way above the industry average of about 6 to 7%. So targeting your email really works. You're also going to record the results of your emails. And there are two numbers that you're going to want to track. Open rates, which are a sign of customer loyalty. So a high open rate means that your cardholders are eager to see what you've sent them. That's really good news. And then click-through rates. So the higher that number is, the people who click on things after opening it, the higher that number it is, the more excited I personally get, because it means that your members opened the email, saw something they like, and took an action. And convincing somebody to take those steps is a huge victory. That click rate also gives you some data about what your email cardholder recipients really are interested in. And you can use that information to craft future emails that are compelling for that cardholder. So just some examples from some of the libraries that I work with. Atlantic County. This was, and it's a long email because you can't make them wider. So I had to do the top of the email here on the left and the bottom half of the email on the right. There's very little text. It's all book jackets, but it did really well for their audience, above a 35% open rate and a 9% click-through rate, which is really incredible. And then this is a example of an email that I sent when I worked at the Public Library of Cincinnati, Hamilton County. There's some things I would do differently now with this email. One, I think the annotations next to the books are too long. However, the one thing I think I did really well was the subject line, which is up at the top. And then B, I only promoted 3 books at a time, and that seemed to work really well. But this particular email had a 61% open rate, a 6% click-through rate, which is right at industry average. But when I went back, so I would record how many holds and checkouts there were on these 3 titles before I sent the email. And then about 3 or 4 days later, I would go back and record how many checkouts and holds there were again. And after 3 or 4 days that this email had been sent, there were 443 copies total placed on hold of these 3 books. So that was kind of amazing. That's the kind of results that you can get with email marketing. When should you send your emails? So if you're sending an email to a group of people, you're going to want to try to imagine what it is that they do all day. It's true that we have access to our email all of the time, but what we want to do is target our audience at the point of the day in which they're going to be most likely to open their email, because the sooner they see it and open it, the more likely they are to take an action. So an example is, before COVID, I would send an email to parents of school-age children, but I would avoid the mornings because we know people are getting their kids ready for school. I also avoided like late afternoon to evening because I knew people were picking up their kids from school and taking them to after school activities and getting them dinner. I mostly sent, if I was trying to target parents, I would send them an email either super early in the morning, so it was sitting in their box when they woke up before the kids got up, or I would send it like 8 or 9 p.m. at night after I knew that their kids were in bed, because I knew they would be free to take an action right away when that email popped into their box. And this is really the strategy that I employ right now when I'm sending marketing emails from novelists. I usually send them early in the morning so that they're sitting in the inbox of librarians when librarians get to work. I might also send them late in the morning, right before lunch, because I know a lot of library staff workers check their email during their lunch hour. When I would send marketing emails to teenager, I never sent them in the morning. I exclusively emailed teenagers at night, and the later the better. And that's because most of the teens that I had the chance to speak with told me that they didn't have a chance to look at their email until after they had gotten home from their after school activities and maybe their after school job and like started their homework. They were more likely to act on emails late in the evenings. And yes, teenagers read their emails and act on it. Now, of course, COVID has affected all of these strategies. So the thing that I want you to remember is that you just need to think about how your target audience is structuring their day, or imagine as best you can, and try to schedule your email to give them the best opportunity to be seen and acted upon. You're going to experiment. Experimenting is great in library marketing. You might want to even think about sending your emails, depending on how many you're sending, for a 3 to 6 month period. As long as you're keeping track of the results, you can kind of play around with all times of the day, all different days of the week and see which one works best, as long as you're keeping those meticulous records. And after you're finished with your, whatever you decide your experimentation time is going to be, just kind of look through your data and figure out which time of the day resulted in the best email engagement. And that's your best time to send emails. So focus most of your email scheduling for that target audience on that particular time of day or day of week. Let's talk for a few minutes about promoting your collection through print materials. For the promotion of items in collection marketing, I think pieces like bookmarks and quarter sheet flyers are really the best solution, especially right now during the pandemic. Those are pieces that are going to be read by patrons in a location other than the library building, which is great during COVID. That means that your member is going to have more, they're going to actually devote some of their time to reading that piece. So those pieces can have a little more text than your email or social media, which I know you're going to love because we love to write great things on our pieces, right? Best of all, those pieces are portable and they're flexible. So you have a lot of opportunities to get them into the hands of your patrons or members. You can ask partners like schools or nursing homes to help you distribute them. When we get out of this pandemic, I want you to start thinking about partnering with attractions like museums or theaters and asking them to help you distribute those pieces. And of course, when we're able to do outreach again, we're going to want to keep those items on our tables at events. We spend a lot of time at outreach events promoting programs, and I want to see us promoting as much collection as programs. Right now, you can attach one of those bookmarks or flyers to your click and collect when people pick them up and do that kind of promotion marketing. I don't want anyone to leave your library without a piece of marketing in their hand, and that is a really great way to get one in there. You can also work print pieces into a book display. So I know some of you are not completely open yet, but maybe you have a book display where people pick up their click and collect. A lot of libraries do that. You can incorporate these pieces in a book display and make it part of the aesthetic of it. And again, you can hand one to patrons, maybe when they come up to you to ask a question. Maybe you notice as they're picking up their click and collect that they are checking out books in a certain genre, and you happen to have a print collection piece that matches that has more reading suggestions, you can give them to that. Just kind of try to think outside the box and think of as many ways that you can to get those print pieces into the hands of your card members. For other ideas, you can collaborate with your staff at your library. This is kind of fun if you ask your coworkers for ideas about how you might distribute books and flyers, bookmarks and flyers more effectively. It helps you to get some buy-in from your fellow staff members. It's kind of a fun collaboration thing. And it might also give you some ideas that you hadn't thought of personally. I always like to steal good ideas from good people. So we only have a few more minutes, but I want to really quickly share with you 4 big mistakes that I made when I first started promoting books. I don't want you to do these things. So here are the 4 things you need to avoid. First was recommending books. Instead, you want to suggest books. And I know that sounds like semantics, but there is a real difference between a recommendations of books and a suggestions of books for readers. So my friend Becky Spratford runs this blog. It's called RA for All. And I think I sent a link to Ellen so you can read it. But she points out that library anxiety is a real thing for card holders. So library users feel a little bit of anxiety when we're suggesting books to them because they feel pressured to read the book, even if they're not really sure that it's something that they're going to love. So if you use the word suggestion, it takes a little bit of that pressure off of your member or card holder and lets them know it's okay to return a book unread or to decline a suggestion from you. I also used to use plot as a device to promote books, and instead we want to use story elements. So most readers advisory experts rely on the vocabulary of story elements to make book suggestions. And this is a way of describing books without talking about the plot. So we know that when readers are picking a book, they're not looking at the plot, which was like revolutionary to me. They're looking for things like pacing, the characters, the tone, the style, and the storyline. The storyline is different than the plot because it focuses on the way that the story is told as opposed to what happens in the story. Mind blown. You guys probably already know this. I didn't. If you're one of the people like me who don't know a whole lot about story elements, Novelist has actually written a book called The Secret Language of Books that explains story elements, and you can get a free downloadable copy of it. Ellen has the link. It's really awesome. It also helps you in collection marketing because it helps you to describe books in a way that will be more appealing to your readers than plot is. Mistake number 3 is to think that you don't really have the skills to suggest books. And everyone in your library can suggest books, and I mean everyone, all the way from the janitor to the director of your library. When I worked in Cincinnati, I kind of had a real hang up about suggesting books to others. I can't tell you how many times I said to someone, well, I'm not a real librarian, but I really like this book. So I love to read. If you love to read, you can suggest books. You don't have to have a degree. A degree certainly helps, but you don't have to. And I would encourage you to encourage your staff, everyone at your library, to get involved with suggesting books to patrons. It's going to be better for your patrons' experience. And you can just share your passion with another reader. Who doesn't love that? The 4th mistake is limiting the book genres that I would suggest to what I knew or read. And what I should have done was use my resources like Novelist to make recommendations from genres that I wasn't familiar with. So I would encourage you to consciously push yourself to suggest books that are outside your own reading comfort zone. It's better for you, it's better for your readers, and I think it's better for the world in general, frankly, when we broaden our horizons to suggest books that are outside our comfort zone. We should really strive to push our readers to kind of read in places that they aren't used to, because it'll just help to create a more empathetic community in our reading community, and it's just better for everyone. So I think now you're able and ready to market your collection. I hope that you do so as often as you can without reservation. Your collection makes it possible for your library to do all of the work that it does. Your collection is the reason that people come in the door, and it makes it possible to do work with literacy and all of the other great programs that your library provides. People are still reading books, obviously, and most of the folks who walk through your doors or interact with your library online are looking for books. So don't stop talking about your collection. Mention it when you talk with the media, write about it on your blog, send emails to your members with information and book suggestions from your collection, post about it on social media. If we want to attract new people to our library, if we want to compete with big box sellers like Amazon and Walmart or whoever and Hulu, we have to market the thing that we are the best at, which is our collection. That is our biggest asset. And if we want to make the world a more informed and more empathetic place, that is our job. We need to be promoting the collection. So in fact, at Novelist, we really believe that books and libraries have the power to transform lives. And there are many stories about the way that reading can help people become better citizens, better leaders, and better versions of themselves. We're really passionate about working with libraries to help them connect books with their readers. And you can actually hire a Novelist expert to lead some staff training on Reader's Advisory if that's something you're interested in. Also marketing, or maybe just doing advocacy for your library. If you want additional information on that or a demo of one of our products, you can email me. Again, my email address is ahirsch@ebsco.com. Connect with me on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn. Send me a message. I want to thank you for listening to me today. And do we have any questions? Oh my goodness, the chat was busy. Let's look and see here. Yes, I have my my SharePoint does live transcribing, so I hope that it didn't have a whole lot of words that were weird. But I went to a conference last fall And I listened to a woman who was talking about accessibility during presentations, and she suggested that we turn this particular function on PowerPoint that allows live captioning. So I started doing it because I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to listen and understand what's going on in the presentation. So I'm just going to kind of go all the way up at the top to see, do we have any questions? Are there any libraries here using social media platforms? Oh, there's someone from a breakout link. Yeah, that'll be a good thing to talk about. I would be really interested to hear about social media because I know it's different for every community. And again, I would just emphasize that what works for your library or what works for your neighboring library may not work for you. It's great to get ideas, but don't be discouraged if one of your library friends at a different library did something and had great success and you don't have success. It's just dependent on your audience and you can just keep trying. Marketing is a big experiment, to be honest with you. I used to have a science teacher, and I think this is one of the reasons that I love experimenting with marketing. She was all about those scientific experiments, and she just really made me want to get in there and test everything. So you can do that with marketing. You just test different messages and see which one works for your followers. All of the links that I mentioned look like they're in the chat, so thank you for that, Ellen. I would encourage you guys to watch all of those. Someone is using YouTube and Pinterest. That's awesome. Oh, Rachel says, I hope you don't mind my reading this. Our counseling allows us to send or post during library opening hours. So I have some experience with this. Our director in Cincinnati also was that way. And you know, it was frustrating, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. So depending on when your opening hours are, and I get why they do that, I think I would just think about over time making a concerted argument with some data and statistics that shows that people are on social media all the time, and that companies that post on social media outside of whatever the hours are that your library is open get a lot of great results, and that social media is actually like the people on those platforms expect you to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not physically possible, but we can be posting things outside of work hours. So I had to do a couple of years of just advocating for breaking that rule. And finally, I showed enough data and gave enough proof that the minds were changed, but it did take me a couple of years. So I feel you on that, Rachel. too. Let's see. Janelle Collins asks, can we search novelists for those books that specifically have media mentions? Yes, Janelle. I don't want to switch over to the novelist site, but yeah, you can search for media mentions. What I will do is we've written a couple of articles on the novelist blog on how to use media mentions, and I will send them to Ellen, and then she can put them in the, I think she called it the wiki later, so that you can have some information about how to use media mentions for novelists. I'm gonna write that down. Thank you, I appreciate you saying it's a good presentation. Post scheduling on Facebook a lot. Thank you for the info on optimal posting times. You're very welcome. It will change in 4 months. So go to social media today and just keep an eye on it. They have some newsletters that you can sign up for, so you can get updates on social media sent directly to your inbox. And that's how I get all of my information about social media. Is it okay to mostly post the same content to Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or should it be more targeted? Very good question. So, I wrote a blog post on my blog, Super Library Marketing. I have a blog about library marketing, of course. And I talked about this concept of repurposing content. So I think what you're talking about is reposting the same things to all 3 platforms. You can promote the same thing across platforms, but I wouldn't use the same text or same images across the different platforms. So the easiest way for me to explain this is to ask you to go to superlibrarymarketing.com, which is my blog, and then search repurposing, and you'll see the blog post. There's also a really great, I'm gonna put this in the chat. I can't get the link because I'll have to get out of my PowerPoint, but it's called the CoSchedule Social Media Optimizer. So that is, if you Google that, there's a company called CoSchedule, and they've created this thing called the Social Media Optimizer. So you type out like a line of text, maybe it's the text you're going to use for Facebook, and you plug it in there, and it tells you how well it will do on all the other platforms, on Twitter, on Instagram, and what you might need to tweak or change to make the text work on those different platforms. It doesn't look at the images, but it does look at the text, and that can be really helpful. And I would encourage you to Google the CoSchedule Social Media Optimizer and use it, because it's a great cheat tool to make that work a lot easier. Right now, Facebook and Instagram want aspect ratio images of 1:1, so you can use the same image for Facebook and Instagram right now. I can't remember what Twitter just changed theirs. I want to say it's like 1:91 or it's some crazy aspect ratio that Twitter has right now. Personally, to promote my blog, I also use a 1:1 image aspect ratio on Twitter, and it works just fine. So I think the images you can post across different platforms. The text I would change a little bit though. Oh, thank you, Ellen. She looked it up for you. So that link to the social media optimizer is now in the chat. Any tips for growing and promoting YouTube channels, or is it better for us to Facebook our videos? That's a really good question. It depends on where your audience is at. Personally, I have some problems with the Facebook platform in terms of privacy and ethics. I have a lot of friends in the library world who are using YouTube and getting a lot of really great results. So my suggestion is to post it both places if you have the resources, and if you don't, I would pick YouTube over Facebook. So I hope that helps. The one tip for YouTube, if you have an email newsletter list, so you've created a video, you post it on YouTube, I would send an email to your cardholders, or maybe a target segment of your cardholders who might be interested in your video, and let them know that the video is there with a link to the video. And I would do it within 24 hours of posting the video on YouTube, because the more views you get in the first 24 hours after posting on YouTube, the more your video will be shown to other people who come to the platform and they're just looking for other stuff, and they're not specifically searching for your particular library, or maybe not even specifically searching for that content. So you want to get as many views as possible during that first 24 hours. And you know that your email list is a bunch of followers who love you. So why not send the video to them and see if you can get them to watch the video to help boost the organic reach of your YouTube video. But I would pick YouTube over Facebook if I had to. Yeah, you're right, Lisa. You need, on Facebook, you need a budget to boost posts. And that is very frustrating as well. They are doing a lot of things that hurt nonprofits and libraries, and I'm not a big fan of that. Hopefully nobody from Facebook is ever going to watch this presentation. I'm just scrolling through. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. Oh, someone said they like the captioning. Thank you. I'm so glad it worked out. This is only the second presentation that I've used it on, so I'm very happily. I know in Novelist you can create book recommendation lists with auto-generated covers. What if the copy your library holds is different or less pleasing? If you're, I don't know what you're using those lists for. So if you're using them in Library Aware, you can change out the cover pretty easily. We have book jackets available, and we have all of, like, Everytime Baker and Taylor, which is one of the major publishers, I'm sure you know that, of books, or distributors of books. Every time they scan a new book cover in, we get a copy of it. So it's really easy to change it out in Library Aware, but I don't know if you're using the list in Novelist, if you're just like printing it out or putting it in a book flyer on another platform, like using Word or Publisher, you probably can't change the cover out, I would imagine. And yes, I forgot to mention that we actually created 3 free book lists for you. So one of our professional designers went in today and made a book list for adults, teens, and kids. The links for those are in the chat. You can just click on it And then you can save it to your computer using the download, the little download icon up at the top, which is the arrow pointing down. There's also a print icon up at the top. You can just print copies of it. You can use those book lists however you want. You can post them on social media if you want to save them as an image. You can right click on it and save it as an image on your computer. You can send it out in an email. You can put it on social media. Those are our gift to you. They're all sized A4, so they should work for you guys. And that was my designer's gift to you. So hopefully you'll love those. Let's see. And Ellen also put in the link for RA for All here in the chat. I love Becky. She's also very passionate. I think you guys will love her too. So take a look at her blog as well. Any other questions? Did I miss any, Ellen? I don't think I did.
No, that's been great. Thank you. Yeah, that was terrific, Angela.
Oh, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Oh, I've got a lot to go away and think about, but I'm figuring a bunch of other people have too.
Excellent. Yes. Well, again, if you have any further questions or you just want to talk about library marketing, my email address is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me or connect on social media.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, you doing a nighttime presentation for us.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Lovely, and lovely to get to meet you this way, and hopefully we get to have you come to Australia sometime in some imaginable future.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. I don't think we can see me now. I don't know why. Okay, anyway, so thank you for your fantastic presentation about collection marketing. I'm sure everyone's been inspired to try out some of your ideas and promote and market their collections. And I'd particularly like to say thank you on behalf of everyone for those creating those wonderful book lists as well. That was really generous of you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I don't know where I've gone. Okay, so now we're going to, everyone's been assigned to a breakout room, which so that we can talk about the presentation about Novelist with Angela Hurst. So please just wait to be moved into these. A member of the Readers Advisory Steering Committee will be there to facilitate. You're welcome to unmute yourselves for this session, and we'll be discussing Novelist, and you can use also.
Sorry, that's my fault. I unmuted everyone, but that had the effect of muting Monique. So I've now just got to find Monique. I'm
under presenter Sutherland.
Yep, got you.
Libraries.
Yes, so sorry. That's why you got.
That's okay.
My apologies.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't quite know where I've disappeared to, but
yeah, I don't know why your video's not working either.
No,
so,
I don't know either. Sorry.
Okay, I'll just open the breakout rooms now. And
perfect.
So if we keep to time, that will give us about 10 minutes in this lot.
Where we talk about why we read, what we have read, and what we are currently reading. We also discuss any promotions or events that are happening in the library. So for example, with the New South Wales Reads, we promoted the Lucky's book chat on our program. And with the book chat, we record our sessions live once a month, and we chose a Wednesday morning from 11 a.m. till 12 p.m. And the reason why we chose this time was because it worked well with both Ida and I's desk shifts and other duties that we undertake, as well as our RDOs. And we did interview a small range of our patrons, and that time suited them the most as well. So we record our sessions, and then we upload them to various platforms, which is our Central Northern Regional Library Innovation Studio YouTube channel. our Apple and Google podcast channel as well. And we also upload to our social media platforms, which is YouTube and our Instagram accounts. So I'll just go to the next slide and I'll just show you a bit of our live book chat session.
How do I go back now?
So
Here we go. Sorry.
so play a bit.
Butter with melt in the mouth.
I know. It's always the kind.
Isn't it?
Ita and Amanda and Susan and Peter, thank you so much for having me on this morning. This has been a hoot. I've loved it. What better fun than just, apart from reading, than sitting around talking about reading.
I know, that's what we think. Yeah. It's always good.
That's where the podcast was developed from.
Yes.
So that was a live book chat with author Tanya Hislop that Ita invited her to come and join us. So I'll hand over to Ita to discuss why we started the podcast.
Like you just heard Tanya say, what's more fun than talking about books, reading about books, but then you have to talk about books. So that's why we wanted to start it, because I love of reading and discussing the books with others. And we also wanted to meet our patrons where they were already, So a lot of our patrons had told us they listened to podcasts while they were exercising or while they are commuting to work. So we thought, why not meet them in that space? And we thought it's a great way to promote our collection. We just heard the previous presenter, Angela, talk about the need to promote our collections. Well, this is how we thought would be a good platform to do that. We also wanted to include our library community into Reader's Advisory. So the picture that's there, it's also of a live book chat with us. And you can see 2 librarians and 2 patrons that have opted in to come. We open it up for anybody, but usually we have about 6 people that come. And so we also use it to cross-promote our events. So we do our reading challenges. We do a reading challenge every year. New South Wales Reads and author events we mentioned there, but mostly we just talk about books and we suggest books to everybody. We don't recommend them anymore. So I'll hand over to Amanda and she can tell you about the challenges.
So we did run into a few challenges. One of them was we had no experience or any idea where to start with developing a podcast. We didn't know about what formats we should use. For example, we didn't know whether we would want to do a Zoom recording or would we just use purely voice only. We didn't have any equipment or software available to us. And we didn't know about what we even had to purchase in regards to developing our podcast. We also didn't have a budget to buy new equipment or to subscribe to any of the software that we needed to have. And we weren't sure how to market our podcast once it was up and running as well. Also, COVID put our project plan behind. It was one of our 2020 goals to start a podcast, but we stayed open during COVID. Our library closed, but we had a click and collect available. So we were split into 2 teams. So Ida worked at the library 1 week and I worked from home 1 week, and we switched. So we weren't together. So during that time, we weren't exactly sure how we could make a podcast happen with us being in 2 different places. And our own personal expectations of how we wanted the podcast to go. So I think one of my expectations was I didn't want to have a video. I just wanted to use my voice, and that was because I'm just not confident in public speaking. And so I thought if people couldn't see me, that was okay. and whether we would use a script or not, and if we would have guests every episode or if we would just talk amongst ourselves about what we've been reading and making book suggestions. So there are a few of our challenges, and Ida's going to talk about overcoming them.
Okay, so first, our inexperience. We needed to do some research. So the end of 2019, Sally Turbot from the podcast Turbot and Duck, I think it was called, did a workshop at Newcastle Library. So my boss sent us there, but Amanda couldn't go, so I went, and I learned lots from Sally, but also she was talking about all the equipment we had to use, and it sort of went on the back burner a bit because of COVID. But because of COVID, we also needed to learn new skills because we had to bring everything online. So we learned how to use Zoom, and we use Zoom for our book groups and for author talks. So then we decided, why not just use Zoom for the book chat as well? And so we did that. We decided to just use the stuff we already had in the library. So we had laptops, we had a Zoom subscription, so why not use that? All our patrons were already on it because that's the thing that happened in COVID. Everybody went on to Zoom. And collaboration, we worked together with our colleagues from the Innovation Studio, our Makerspace people. They said, if you have your Zoom presentation, we can use that to put it on podcast platforms. So they basically helped us to do it. And we also want to collaborate with our other CNRL libraries so they can come to our book chats and participate, so we can market it to their libraries as well. That's about it, I think. Yeah. That's how we overcome the challenge. So I'll give it back to Amanda.
So we also started a book chat blog to complement our podcasts, and it was just another way to engage with our audience. So we post all our book reviews that we've discussed on our podcast, and we then also post upcoming podcast sessions to the blog and just other book reviews that promote our library collection. So for example, one of our patrons in the book chat was talking about Australian crime novels that she had only just started to read them, and she wanted a list of Australian crime writers. So I just posted that to my blog. We also started our second reading challenge for 2021. So we post that up on the blog, and one of the options there is that they need to leave a comment on our book chat blog about a book that they've read during their challenge. So it's just another way to engage our patrons with our collection, and of course just with us personally as well. So I'll hand back to I did forget to mention that our blog post platform that we use is Medium, which was recommended by a colleague.
Cool. So we've now done 4, and what can we improve on? We went to Newcastle to the podcast festival, and it was held in the beautiful new digital library at Newcastle Libraries. And as you can see on the photo, there were a lot of podcasters sharing their knowledge with us. So we found that we were already on the right track with putting it on Zoom and putting it on different platforms. But we learned also a lot of things that we could better. So write show notes for each episode. You have to have a script, but be flexible. At the moment, we just have a running sheet. We want to create a mailing list to promote the book chat, which was also mentioned by Angela in the previous session. Emails work, so yes, we definitely have to work on that. We would like some better equipment. So at the moment, we're just using the laptop microphone, but all these professional podcasters were telling us about the, what's it called, Yeti, the Blue Yeti microphone. Apparently that's the la-di-da-di one that podcasters use, so you have better sound. But after all that, really, what we would recommend to everybody is to just get started with what you have fun, and just improve as you go. Yes, that's it. That's it from us. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.
And there's one more. Questions? That's actually the original photo that we made our logo from. And that was from a Reader's Advisory seminar, and we're sitting in the Opera Bar. No questions? Should we mute ourselves again? Oh, we have to unshare. Can you do that? Stop share. There we go. Oh, what now? Oh, there is Monica.
Hello. Thank you very much for that. I'm really looking forward to listening to your book chat podcast, and I'd like to also have a look at your book chat blog. It sounds amazing, and what a great way to promote reading, and it really fits in with what Angela Hurst was saying in her novelist presentation. So that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. It was brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so up next we have Fiona Johnston from Relive Libraries, and she's going to talk about the Book Connect service that they have. So welcome, Fiona.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. So I'll be talking about our Book Connect service, which we did as a pilot in December 19, January 2020, just as a trial to see how it would go. And when COVID hit, we rebranded it and tweaked it a little bit and relaunched that service post-COVID. So I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. Hopefully you'll see it come up. Can everyone see my slides, hopefully? Form-based Readers Advisory was something we had been thinking about for some time. And at the end of 2019, we decided to launch it as a pilot project. In preparation for that, we spoke to some other libraries regarding how they had used the service and how it had worked for them and how they rolled it out. Some of the concerns we had initially were staff workload and being able to provide that service within a set period of time. So that's why we rolled it out on a trial basis. We set up a Readers Advisory working group. So all the members of the group would be assigned requests on a rotational basis. We also held a competition amongst the staff to choose a catchy name for the service, and Book Connect was the winning title for the service. The Relive Libraries uses a ref tracker system, which is basically an Ask the Library software that we place on our website. There's a series of forms that customers can submit depending on their inquiry. So we have a local history form, a suggestion for purchase form, just a general feedback form. So we decided to design a new form around Book Connect. I don't know if you can see very well, but we just had a few questions that we asked the customer to list authors or books that they liked to give us an idea, types of books that they liked, genres, anything like appeal characteristics that would sort of give us some clues as to what to recommend. We put forward that staff would answer the query within 1 week and would provide a list of 5 suggestions from the library collection. And that could be in any format. It could be print, it could be digital, could be DVDs, it could be music. We kept it quite broad. We replied to customers via an email and provided the title of the book, a blurb, and a link to the library catalogue, so customers could access the title through our catalogue and choose to reserve it or come and collect it. So we held the pilot over December 2019 and January 2020, and we put an emphasis on summer reading. The library staff collaborated with our marketing team to create promotional material. And that's just an example of one of the images that we used, and we placed that on our social media. We had print brochures, and we also circulated information about the service in all of our newsletters. So some of the benefits of the program, during the 2-month trial, we got 19 requests. We got some really positive feedback from customers, which you can see there. And it was also really beneficial for staff as well. It gave them more confidence when providing readers advisory. They got more familiar and engaged with the collection as well. So it was a really useful tool for staff to really improve their readers advisory skills. When COVID happened, the Wallara Libraries closed to the public in March. And in June, we reopened offering a limited select and collect service where customers could reserve books on the OPAC and collect them at a pre-arranged time from staff. During this period, we shut off all reservations for picture books as it was a browsing collection and quite a large collection. We decided to reintroduce Book Connect again as a way for parents to access picture books for their children based on our recommendations, and also for the general customers to ask for some selected titles that they might enjoy. We changed the process a little bit. Rather than asking for a list of 5 books, staff would select 10 books from the shelf and put aside for the customer. In the 5-week period that we offered select and collect, we got 143 Book Connect requests. A lot of those were for picture books based around popular themes and popular authors, but we also had a lot of requests from teenagers wanting recommendations on YA and also the general adult audience. So it was quite a successful relaunch, and we have continued the service, so it is ongoing and part of our library service now. Some other things we did during COVID, because the library was closed, we moved completely to online, and we really wanted to promote our e-resources. Our customer service team actually called all of our customers and checked in with them and letting them know what was happening, and also directing them towards our online library and sort of talking them through the process of how to download and how to access our e-collection. A lot of our customers had no idea that these collections existed, so it was a great way for customers to discover our e-resources. As a way of promoting the e-collection, we also circulated lists online every week on our e-platforms. So these are just some examples here. We did comfort reads, which during COVID, I think was a really big thing in reading habits. People were going back to the familiar and comforting books that they read, that they always go back to. We also did things like killer reads and cooking to promote the collection online. We also did some curated lists based on themes that we popped up on our website, and this has continued. So we're still offering the curated lists on a regular basis. We also offered staff reviews as well, and this has also continued post-COVID. So thank you, everyone. Thanks very much for your time.
Ooh. Thank you very much, Fiona. That was really interesting. I love the Book Connect title. That sounds really good. As Ellen put in the chat, if you do have any questions about Book Chat, could you please ask those questions to Fiona in the chat? Okay, so our next person who we're going to have speaking is Christiane Burkett, and she's talking about the Reading Challenge 2021 called Bookish Fun in 21, and she's from Gunnedah Shire Council. So welcome, Christiane.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm from Gunnedah Shire Council, and I'm going to start the screen share straight away. I'm going to write about Bookish Fun in 21, which is the Gunnedah Shire reading challenge. So I'll go straight on to screen share for you. Right, okay, here we go. Okay, for those of you who don't know where Gunnedah is, it's up there in the far north of New South Wales, and its closest towns are Tamworth and Armidale. And it's quite a small library. Think of a shop front. And I have a staff of 5 people. Sorry, we are a staff of 5 people. 3 of us work full-time and 2 part-time. And I'm presenting on Bookish Fun in 21. Now, this was a reading challenge that was compiled by one of the colleagues in the council who has a staff reading club. And when I saw it, I asked her if we could adapt it for library use. And so this was done. And there is the entry sheet. And it's quite a fun challenge because it's in 3 sections. You could only read 1 book per category. You can't use the red book with a cat on the front cover by an author named Jill in all 3 categories. You actually have to read different books for the different categories. So for the Get Colourful section, there's books where you just have to read a book that is red, black, blue, orange, white, yellow, gold, purple, or pink. And then the second section is for the love of animals. You can just read a book with this animal in the title or on the cover, a type of bird, a horse or a unicorn, dog or a cat, a wolf, a sea creature, a dragon, a type of reptile. So there's lots and lots of possibilities. And the last section is Relive Your Childhood. So it's got things like London Bridge is Falling Down, a book set in England, Hickory Dickory Dock, a book with the clock or the time in the title, It's Raining, It's Pouring, a book which is about the forces of nature, Ring a Rosies, a book with the rose in the title or on the cover, that type of thing. 12 Days of Christmas, of course, a book with the Christmas theme. So this lends itself to all sorts of great displays. And for January and February, we had these cube displays, and we were concentrating on the first segment, which was Get Colourful. So we simply pulled off the shelves books in all the various colours, reds, greens, blacks, pinks, etc. And we had the entry form up the top so that we noticed that a lot of books were going, but not that many people took the entry form. And so we also had a pile of entry forms by the circulation desk. And as people checked the books out, we were able to give them their entry form. Some of them didn't realise it was a competition, even though we have signs. Get the Gunnedah Shire Library Reading Challenge 21, Get Colourful, read a book that's in all of these colours. And there's a couple other close-ups. It's a reading challenge that lends itself to a lot of displays. At the moment, because it's Multicultural March, we're concentrating on books in different countries, and also for Harmony Week, different cookings of different countries. We've turned it into a competition, and people can enter as many times as they like. The entries go into a draw to win a $50 gift voucher from a local bookstore. So far, there's only 2 sections, adults and children, and it's a year-long competition, so the entries close on the 15th of December. And I'm not quite sure who will get to pull the winning entries out. But yeah, it lends itself to a lot of displays, and we'll be using the theme as displays probably throughout the entire year. And that's it, basically, quite short. And it's just a promotion that's very easy to do, very easy to adapt. And yeah, any questions?
Okay. Oh, thank you, Christiane. We're just keeping the questions in the chat at the moment. It sounds like the reading challenge was really fun, and it encouraged people to read outside their comfort zone. And it was lovely to hear that you could link your book displays with the different challenges to, show people visually the types of books that they might like to try and read that they might not have thought about before. So that was fantastic. So if you do have any questions, anyone, it'd be great if you could just add them to the chat, and Christiane will be able to answer them for you.
Right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. So our next talk that we have is Christine Brennan, and she's from Randwick Library, and she's going to tell us all about the New South Wales Reads program that we held throughout December and January. So welcome to Christine.
Thanks, Monique. I feel a bit of an imposter because I came late into the piece to get this up and running. Actually, Monique was one of the founding members, I want to say, and there was lovely Amy and Melanie, whom I'm sure you're all very familiar with. So I'm just going to share my screen and get it going. Hopefully you can all see that. So I'm just going to take you through from concept to delivery. Now I kind of didn't read the brief properly. I've got a few more than 10 slides, but I promise I won't keep you going. That's me. You'll have these notes, I believe, after this event. And that's just what I'm going to take you through. So concept, how we came up with the prep and the planning, the execution, and what's next. Very exciting. So it was a follow-on. I'm sure many of you have been familiar with the Author Talks Online that was developed by Melanie and crew. And we just wanted to continue the momentum of that. Hang on. We wanted to continue the momentum, increase and encourage community engagement in an unpredictable pandemic landscape. We all were familiar with the lockdown, especially here in Sydney, and continue to offer ways to connect and bring a sense of belonging for a diverse culture. And it was something fun to do during the holiday seasons when travel options were limited. So who was it? As I said, similar team as the original Author Talks Steering Committee. Melanie from Hornsey, Amy from Riverina, and Monique from Sutherland Shire, your lovely hostess today. And lots of participation from partnering libraries and lots of support from New South Wales Public Libraries Association. Thank you so much for that. So using the One Book, One Community concept as the base, a meeting was set up to kind of kick it all off and get input and buy-in across all partner libraries, and everyone was invited to choose their book. So I mean, I thought that was a very clever idea of getting everyone's attention and buy-in. And what fell out of that meeting was there would be an Instagram read along, and a new Instagram account was set up, book club resources for in-person book clubs, online book clubs, reading lists, local history archives. So it was a nice connection with local history, that particular book. And 2 live online events were held and run successfully. So the collection development colleagues were encouraged to increase the number of copies of the chosen book, and it was Lucky's. Here at Randwick City, we had multiple formats. That's just a quick picture of what we put up on Instagram. And it also featured in a relatively new bestsellers collection, and that bestsellers collection was only in one of our branches, and then we rolled it out as part of the New South Wales Reads initiative. So it was a nice kind of platform to kick it off from. To support all of the work and to support all the partnering libraries, there was the Google Drive that had been used to communicate author events was also used to communicate and host all of the resources needed to run this initiative as well. So it was very easy. A lot of work went on behind the scenes to make it very, very usable and accessible for everyone involved. And loads and loads and loads of assets like images and resources like book lists and were there ready for everyone to tap into and use. So if you haven't already joined in, I do think it just makes your life so much easier. It's all organized for you. There's nothing much to do except tell your patrons. So the initial New South Wales Reads initiative had Lucky's, as I said before, and it was very clearly communicated what the schedule would be. Monique worked very, very hard on delivering on that schedule. That's it there that you can see. And we had quite a nice pickup with limited promotion and no budget. There was no money spent on this. It was all word of mouth and partnering libraries promoting it. So that was pretty successful without any, big budget spend. And it was a nice tie-in with our local history colleagues as well. They were able to share archives, photos from their archives. So that was a nice connection. And then there was the supporting event was based on a theme in the book. So it was just a nice collaboration across the library, which doesn't always get to happen. And then it all led up to the pinnacle event, which was, and for some, including ourselves here in Run, we used it as our Love Your Library tie-in. There was a mini author interview that helped promote the event, and that was pushed out onto YouTube, and partner libraries could access and share that. And as a result, there was 198 patrons that signed up to attend. As with all things, the online, there's real Zoom fatigue, so that was a bit of a challenge. It was summer, lovely weather, people don't want to be online anymore, things were opening up. But having a 31% participation was pretty good. And then, of course, it's there, available indefinitely and forever, as long as YouTube exists, for all people to watch and view afterwards. What's happening now is there's a survey out with partner libraries to collect feedback on how that initiative went. If you haven't done the survey, please do so, and you were involved in the initiative. It will really help inform what happens next, and it will also help drive what, but as I said before, sorry, I'm repeating myself, what happens next. And then next week, once we've got all of the survey, or as many as we can, I think there's only 19 answers there. So if you haven't filled it in and you have been a participant in the New South Wales Reads, please share your feedback so we can move on in an informed way. So the next meeting to discuss what's going to happen next with both the author talks and the New South Wales Reads will happen next week on the 24th of March. We've got a lovely lineup. Lydia from the Sydney Writers Festival is going to join and discuss what's happening in the Nights at the Library program. We'd also like to look into and develop some kind of a roadmap for delivering hybrid events where people will be invited into the library to watch live stream events or having a live audience and stream that out to partner libraries. The fantastic thing that COVID had, there was many negatives about COVID, but one of the fantastic things is the opportunities to collaborate and actually share resources, particularly with our partner libraries that may not have the same level of staffing and resources to their fingertips as some others do. And then our next round of author talks are already being developed. So we want to discuss who that will be and take feedback on who we should do next, and also give a wrap up of the New South Wales program. So if you haven't signed up and you're interested to attend, there was an email out from Melanie, but I'm sure we can share that again. And here's just a quick snapshot of the events coming up. We have Samuel Johnson. He is best known for Love Your Sister book, and he's going to present on his collection of stories about mums from a host of people. That's on Thursday, 26th of March at 6:30 p.m. And we have the Sydney Writers Festival events. They are all being hosted by the State Library, but all libraries are invited to share and promote those, and also encouraged to host in-library events where you're streaming the events to patrons, particularly those that may not have good data in their homes, or they are, they're not really confident with using Zoom, and they might like to actually share a cup of tea or a glass of wine if that's available to them at the library, and just bring that connectivity back. And then in May, we're going to have Meredith Bergman and Nadia Wheatley, remembering the 60s. I didn't realize that Nadia was also a historian, so I think that will be a very interesting talk. And then we've got Hugh McKay, just can't wait for that one. That might be a hybrid event. Still working on that. Wallara Libraries are going to be the hosts, and then we're going to stream it out to all our partner libraries. And that's just the team that are running the behind the scenes. We now have a central email, events@newsouthwalespla.org.au. So if you get emails from there, that's those 5 people who are behind it. And do feel free to reach out to any of us individually as well if you want to find out more information. And I believe questions are going to be in the chat. So I had a slide for questions, but I'll end it there. Thank you for listening to me. It was a real privilege to represent the committee. I hope I did it justice. I feel like I'm like a racehorse bolting out, and I'm going to finish there. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Christine. I thought you did a great job, and I'm really looking forward to all the talks that we've got coming up and hearing what other people have to say at next week's meeting on the 24th of March. So thank you very much for that. Okay, so next up we have Ellen. Ellen's going to talk to us about the Indie Reads lists and Readers Advisory Reading. And we all know Ellen's from the State Library of New South Wales. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. I'm just sharing my screen. I'm not using 5 slides. I'm going to do this live on the internet, as one always, yes. So Indie Reads screen. How to do a list. Make sure you're logged in. Now, my suggestion is if you're doing these as lists for use in your library is to use a generic email address. So, one that isn't attached to anyone's personal library card, because otherwise no one else can edit it. But how do you do a list? So at first, I'm going to show you a couple of lists I've already been making. Now, mine are around professional development. So I have a library, local studies and libraries, Readers Advisory and libraries, library-related reading, and diversity, inclusion, social justice and libraries. I will share these in the chat. And to share, you just click on the 3 dots, share, and the link is copied to the clipboard. But how do you add something to a list, and how do you create a list? Well, firstly, you start with a book. So I'm just going to be a bit cheeky and use an existing book that's here, because if you haven't read this book, this is one you really should be reading. And if you haven't seen Neil Wyatt's video from last year, that's another one to watch. So you see how there's this little clip pad kind of thing here? You click on that and you add to the list. Now I could add it to an existing list. It shows all the ones I've done, but seeing as I'm showing you how to create a new list. So I'm just going to go for a really bad name. I read this. I don't need to add a description. I make it a public list and I add it. So this is the kind of thing you can do with, so if I now go back to my lists, I've got a list that said, I read this. So again, this can also be shared. So think of this option for the forms-based Readers Advisory that Fiona was talking about, that you can do a list. If you're promoting, if you have in-library displays, you can do a list of Indie Reads titles to promote. And it just, if you're really just looking, if you're sending out the URL, it just looks like this. So that people can then go in, borrow, all this kind of stuff, list on Indie Reads. But you must have to, remember, make it public. So that's me. That's public lists on Indie Reads. Give them a go. Great for sharing reading, because instead of sending a whole lot of individual titles, you can send them as a list. Also very helpful for supporting things like form-based Readers Advisory displays or material on social media. And just a reminder, seeing as I'm doing an Indie Reads presentation, anything that is in the available now, there are unlimited simultaneous titles. So these are a good place to look if people want to borrow something now. Okay, that's me. happy list trying on Indie Reads.
Thank you very much, Ellen. I didn't know that you could make lists on Indie Reads. I think it'll be a really great way to promote books from that collection. That sounds fantastic. So our final presenter before we have afternoon tea is Lani Kilpatrick-Coles from Hornsby Shire Library Service, and she's going to talk about RA on social media. So welcome, Lani.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just sharing my screen now. Hopefully you can all see that. So hello, my name is Lani and I'm a Children's and Youth Library Assistant at Hornsby Shire Libraries. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of Hornsby Shire, which is the Darug and Guringai peoples, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of a couple of our current Readers Advisory initiatives, including staff picks, reader likes and book lists. For Hornsby Shire Libraries, one of the positive things to come out of the pandemic was the opportunity to actually create a Facebook page, which is something that we didn't have before COVID. And this quickly became a platform for online events and programs, and it became a great way to communicate with our patrons, especially during lockdown. When we design a new series of posts, one of the first things we consider is what we hope to achieve from them. It is important for us to have a call to action in each of our posts. This helps us to stay focused when we are designing, and it gives our viewers something to act upon when they see the post. We use our Facebook posts to guide our patrons to use our library app, the OPAC and the library website, which helps us to get maximum use across platforms for each post that we make on social media. Secondary to this, we focus on setting up a digital design concept so that each post in the series looks consistent. My favourite RA project so far has been staff picks. The idea of using giant emoji symbols snowballed out of an emoji bookmark initiative that was originally inspired by Brisbane libraries. Emojis can act as a digital substitute for the non-verbal cues that we use when we are speaking face-to-face. Love them or hate them, I think that emojis have a valid position in modern day language, not as a replacement for text, but as a way of enriching a digital message. Plus, I did think that some giant emoji heads stuck on paddle pop sticks would be a great way to make our viewers smile and engage with our posts. When I first started writing these posts, I often included a blurb about the book, but I have since realized that it's actually better for the written part of the post to be as short and sweet as possible, because viewers are actually more attracted to the fun image than the words behind it. My formula for writing these posts now includes how the staff member reacted to the book, why someone else might enjoy the book, a short statement from the staff member, and then a list of book appeals in bullet point form. When possible, I do also try to tag the author and the publisher as well. Before taking their photo, I ask staff to fill out a form. The form is deliberately quick and easy to fill out, which is essential when you're asking busy staff members to step outside their comfort zone to do a photo shoot for you. The form gives staff the chance to write a short sentence about why the book made them react with their chosen emojis. And I often use this sentence as a quote in the Facebook post. Then all the staff need to do is circle a couple of the book appeals so that I know the reasons why they enjoyed the book and how it might appeal to others. This form makes the process super easy for busy staff members to complete, and it gives me a streamlined and formulaic approach to writing up the post. The staff picks post has become one of our most popular regular posts on Facebook. With just 16 posts in 16 weeks, we have reached over 6,500 viewers. Considering that our Facebook page is still relatively new and we don't have a massive amount of followers, this level of engagement is something that we're quite happy with. I believe that our viewers love seeing the faces of our librarians, and they love seeing what we are reading as well. Another regular post that we have started working on is reader likes. We started creating these posts based on the books that had the highest circulation stats in 2020. When coming up with the design, we wanted the viewer's eye to be caught by the cover of the book that the recommendation was based on. We also included the covers of the recommendations to help the viewer springboard towards their next great read. The link to the catalogue makes it easier for viewers to then go straight ahead and find and reserve their books online. The last regular post that I would like to mention is our book lists. These posts are often based on a particular mood or a theme or some kind of special event. For example, for Library Lovers Day, we posted an image of 6 book covers and then linked viewers to a carefully curated list of bookish reads. For these posts, it's really important to have a concrete idea in mind of the type of books that we're trying to promote and to be able to link readers to a list of about 20 to 30 similar books. Yeah, so I hope my presentation gave you an idea of the Readers Advisory content that we're putting out at Hornsby Library. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Lani. That was really interesting. I personally thought the emojis were a great idea. They look really fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so I hope everybody's enjoyed the lightning talk. So there's certainly some inspiring ideas and programs that we could take ideas from to help improve our own programs. So that was fantastic. And now it's time for afternoon tea. The break is from now until 2:30 p.m, after which Rachel Franks will introduce the rest of today's program. You are welcome to stay online, but I would suggest that you get up and have a stretch because we've all been sitting for quite a while now, and go and enjoy a cuppa. And we hope to see you back here at 2:30 p.m. to see a couple of great author talks. Thank you.
My name is Rachel Franks. I'm the Coordinator of Scholarship here at the State Library of New South Wales. And so I am coming to you from Gadigal land. It is an absolute treat this afternoon to be hosting 2 of our keynotes. The first is coming from Jackie Newling. Now, Jackie might be known to many of you already through her work at Sydney Living Museums. Jackie has, let's say, quite a few books to talk to you about this afternoon. Please don't worry about trying to capture all of the titles. We have a list and we'll be popping that list up on the wiki sometime next week. If you have any questions for Jackie, please use the chat feature and we'll answer as many of your questions as we can as soon as Jackie has talked about eating books. Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you all of you and the State Library of New South Wales for inviting me along today. It's quite a privilege and it's been quite a challenge also to work out how best to stimulate appetites in a digestible way. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Gadigal land, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past and present, and all people, First Nations people across Australia and wherever we are coming in from today. So as I said, I'm delighted, but it's been no easy task to know how to approach this subject. There's a veritable feast out there and the menu is vast, and so is my appetite for puns. You might work that out along the way. It's a broad topic, and sometimes I wonder if I accuse myself actually of being a food fraud, because some people, I think I know everything there is to know about food. I'm not sure about that. I have my particular type, my particular approach to food, and it really comes from a very gastronomic level. So, of course, food is so many things. It's a material substance, it's a vital substance, but it also is, there's so much more to it than the sustenance it can give our bodies. It's brain food, mind food, soul food, pleasure food, sometimes duty food. And as a gastronomer, I have a master's degree in gastronomy, which really explores, I guess, the food itself, but everything around the food, why we eat what we eat. But what I find most interesting is what we don't eat. Why don't we eat it? So there's a reason, there's usually a logic behind the reasons we eat the reasons we eat things or don't eat things. And that really comes down to our learnt culture, and that is founded on our history, it's on politics, it's on economics, it's on class, economy, all sorts of things feed into what we put on the plate. So I'm a keen and curious cook, I suppose, but I'm no chef. I'm a big advocate for domestic cookery, and I don't actually get very excited about chefs, particularly celebrity chefs, or their cookbooks. Now, that might upset some people, but I do find sometimes that restaurant chefs are used to having a fleet of assistants, a whole army of people behind them. They can have their burners on, you know, for 8 hours a day, their ovens on 8 hours a day, and someone else cleans up for them. I'm a domestic cook. I've had a family. I like to entertain. I know how much labour is involved in putting a meal together, and it has to be pleasurable for the host or for the cook as much as it is for the diner. So I think when we're thinking about, you know, what books to recommend to people, we have to work out first, what are they looking for? I was looking around for something else earlier today, and I came across a quote from in the Washington Post from an American chef who claims that recipes are dead. They're dead the same way paper maps are dead. And I think in 21st century, we've all just come out of COVID. We've all had a very digital life for the last 12 months. And I can't really see a show of hands, but perhaps you might think about, when you need a recipe, do you automatically go to your bookcase, or do you automatically go to the net? I can sort of show you. I'm not showing off, this just shows you some of my bookcases. Now, how do I do that? Do we share screen? Okay, so my books are books about food. They're also about cooking. Some of them are just straight up recipe books. You can see there's quite a selection. Most of them are Australian. I must say I'm biased towards Australian books. But, you know, it's broad ranging, let's say. So it has been very difficult to choose the ones that I should bring along or feature today. As Rachel said, there is quite a list, probably too great a list. So I'm just going to choose key ones. I've broken them up into small bites, hopefully, to make it that little bit more digestible. But before we dive into it, again, I don't have a show of hands, but I know Rachel sent out a recipe from my book. So I can unshare the screen. Oh, I can just hold it up there. Some of you, thank you. So it's called Eat Your History. It has 43 recipes in it, but it has 256 pages. So there's a lot more to a good food book, I think, than recipes. We can just go to the net to find a recipe, and it's up to us to play with that recipe and do what we like with it. The same chef who said recipes are dead was quite incensed that he said, I'll write a recipe. It might take me months to create it. I put it out there, and then people meddle with it. They change it, they substitute things. And he was quite incensed about that. Well, I think the whole point of cooking should be creative. It should be about putting our own stamp on it. And I think a recipe is a starting point that each of us can then put our own stamp on, manipulate for our own tastes, our own budgets, our own families. Often we're not cooking for ourselves. So I think it's really selfish to think that people have to adhere strongly to the recipe. Having said that, some of you who might have made the ginger cake, that is where the rules don't apply. You have to, for baking, because it really is a sort of scientific process, it's a balance of wet and dry ingredients and things that will give it air and structure. But you don't have to put ginger in it. You can make it a cinnamon cake. You can make it a chili cake. So there's always a way to manipulate, or, you know, to personalise a recipe. And I think there's only one way to work that out. Give it a go. If it doesn't work, then you know maybe you should go back to the recipe. But you won't know until you try. I have divided the categories of books up into how books, so instructional and foundation texts, because I'm thinking of you guys as librarians, as things that might be on your library shelf or where you can direct your readers. Why books, and when I say why, I mean why we eat what we eat. So I'm particularly looking at Australian food culture there. When books, so history, which different periods of history people might be interested in, and you might be surprised how long the pathways are actually back in history. The ginger cake, for example, we know that before the Elizabethan period, people were eating gingerbread, ginger cakes. So we're actually eating history quite profoundly there. Brain food, books that are good to think, and who books. Books, biographies, books about cooks or written by cooks about other cooks. And of course, a few now books, if we have time, about our more contemporary food scene. Am I right that we should ask questions at any time, Rachel, or do you want to wait till the end?
The questions, just send them through as you have them, and I will bellow from the sidelines so we don't get the echo from having two devices. But if we try and let Jackie get through as many books as possible, and then we'll come in at the end for some Q&A.
Okay, all right. So some of these books we have taken off the State Library shelves, and other ones, for whatever reason, we've just taken the covers, which is quite good for this one because it's quite a hefty tome, so it's saving my muscles. I'll need them in a minute. So my first category is how books, instructional and foundation texts, and Harold McGee on food and cooking. It's just been re-released, I believe, in the last couple of years to an encyclopedia of kitchen science, history and culture. So whether you have the one, you know, the original one or the newer one, I highly recommend it. It tells you why things work and why things don't work. So why pork makes good ham, but lamb doesn't. It is really about the sort of science and chemistry of food, but in a very approachable way. And it really makes sense of a lot of our food traditions. So many of them do, as I say, have a long pathway to the past, and a lot of the foods we have on our tables are the product of times before convenience, before refrigeration, before refrigerated transport. I heard a chef on the radio the other day, he was from Norway, and they asked, you know, what is Norwegian food? And he said it's winter food. It's whatever food people could rely on to last them through the winter. So it's smoked, it's dried, it's salted, it's pickled. That is their cuisine because of their history. They don't need to worry about those sort of things anymore, but that is their food identity. So Harold McGee sort of makes sense of how all that works. So it's an excellent resource for people who are interested in cooking, not just recipes. The other one, which really is a hefty tome, and maybe we should have just got the cover. I don't know if you can see that, Larousse Gastronomique by Paul Joel Robuchon. I have to admit, this is where I'm a food fraud. I have not used this book. I have not cooked out of it, but I know that it is the Bible of European cuisine, if you like, and we're really talking French cuisine here. But for anyone, a budding chef, a TAFE student who really wants to decide to go into a commercial kitchen, this really is the ultimate handbook, I suppose, and something that all chefs aspire to, but also all chefs consult. So this one and Harold McGee would be the two sort of top shelf ones for serious cooks. For us day-to-day cooks in Australia, I think, and we all know this one, matches my shirt. Stephanie Alexander's Cook's Companion. If someone could only have one book on their shelf, and that is a pretty tall ask, it would probably be this one. I gave it to my daughter for her 21st birthday. Interestingly, I gave my son the Common Sense Cookery book, so that is a little bit genderist of me, but also just their interest in the kitchen. But, you know, this really does tell you how to cook pasta and things from scratch. and all the classic sauces. And so it's contemporary food as well as food. And I know Stephanie Alexander was a chef, and I just said I don't have a lot of faith in chefs' cookbooks, but she did write this one for domestic cooks. And I take my hat off to her for what she's accomplished. So there's its counterpart on my family's bookshelf. That's the Common Sense Cookery book. It's been in print for over 100 years. It's been edited many times. So I do bring with it a slight caveat. I mean, it really does go back to basics. It's very, very good in that it has little illustrated instructions at the back, you know, how to gel test for jam, how to dissolve gelatin, how to sterilise jars or segment an orange. So it really is practical basics, which I think for any budding cook or someone first leaving home that's always had mum do everything for them, or dad, it's a really good foundational text. Some of the recipes, though, are quite plain. The shepherd's pie, for example, we made as a sort of tribute to nostalgia. And I think a lot of families these days have quite, I won't say sophisticated tastes, but broad-reaching global tastes, and we found it quite plain. We had to add chili, we had to add all sorts of other things. So, yes, again, it's a sort of good instructional book, but people then should be allowed to add flourishes to meet their own tastes. That said, there are, you know, there's satay in here and green curry, so it's not all grandma's food. It is quite contemporary. Along with that, and this one's quite fragile, so I'll be a bit careful with it. This is the library's copy of the Coronation Cookbook, so the CWA cookbook. It was compiled as a sort of tribute to the coronation of the King in 1937, I'm pretty sure, it might be 34, 1937. And there are various facsimile versions around. Mine has a sort of spiral bound cover, which is probably a little, you know, it's got, and there's food splatters all over it. In the most basic recipes, I still go back to it, you know, if I'm making scones or pikelets or something like that, where you really want to get your quantities, your ratios right. And so I put that in the Common Sense. I've got little marks in them, CWA, or I'll have a recipe in the Common Sense saying C Common Sense, you know, C the other way around, if you know what I mean. So they're very hands-on books, and they're ones I don't mind annotating. My cookbooks aren't necessarily pristine and special. I think the best cookbooks are the ones that have been well handled. Also, if we're looking for classics, you can't go past Elizabeth David. She was writing, gosh, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, but her recipes are timeless. And a lot of modern chefs who write cookbooks about European cuisine, you'd be hard pressed not to find the original recipe or an original version, an earlier version in these books. So modern doesn't mean everything. Some things, you know, it's like Emperor's New Clothes. Some things are just reiterated for each generation and by different publishers. So what you get with Elizabeth David, though, is a conversation also. She really takes you to the place and puts it in context of place rather than just recipes. She wasn't the first to do that, but she does it very eloquently. Now, I'm going to move now to our why books. This is where the gastronomer in me comes in, and this is, you know, for people who want to understand Australian food culture, Australian identity, and really how Australia's palate, I suppose, has developed. It's also quite a lot of myth busting, because we love to think that our grandmothers or our colonial ancestors ate boring, dull, stodgy, monotonous food. And there are several food historians, including myself, who dispute that. Charmaine O'Brien is a local food writer. She wrote The Colonial Kitchen a couple of years ago, and she really brings to life not just colonial food, but she takes us into people's dining rooms, into people's kitchens. She uses literature throughout the 19th century that talks about how people ate, and she does dispel that myth that people were not interested in cooking or were not talented. They might not have been talented cooks as in that chef style, but they certainly were experimental and they made very good use of what was around them. It is quite an academic book though. There are very few illustrations, and it's very lively writing, but it's quite dense. So it really is probably more, someone who's really looking for something a bit more meaty, I suppose, in that sense. Barbara Santich, there's a little book here called Looking for Flavour, and she later brought out a book called Bold Palates. She writes in a very approachable way, very knowledgeable, but very approachable. And Looking for Flavour, I guess, is one of my Bibles. I think it's on page 43. I think pretty much every essay I've ever written or every book or whatever I've written, I might have changed the page numbers. But basically she's saying that, our food is, it expresses our myths and mores, but also our ambitions and our aspirations. So, really very much about how people new to Australia in colonial times particularly approached the food around them and how that's morphed into what we eat today. And most recently, this is a food writer by the name of Colin Bannerman. He's written several books, but I think this one, he sort of combined them into one. It's called The People's Cuisine. And again, he's talking about how our food culture has evolved and how that's been driven by recipe writers, cookbook writers, and cooks themselves. And you can see I've got various post-it notes in here. What I like about it, he writes actually in a very gentle, calm approach. He doesn't sort of buy into fads, and he synthesizes it all quite well and really has made a very palatable history of our food. Thank you, Rachel. I need someone like this all the time. It's lovely. So that does take us into food history, Australian food history. I think sort of two ends of the scale I'll start with. Now, oops. This is not necessarily a book that you will lend. I believe it only had a limited print run. I would love them to print it again, or really someone needs to digitise it. It is called An Annotated Biography of Australian Domestic Cookery Books. It was put together by John Hoyle, who has since deceased, and he passed his cookbook collection of 700 books onto the State Library. So it really it's an amazing asset, an amazing gesture, but it is, as it says, it's a bibliography. If somebody came into your library with their grandmother's cookbook and said, oh, look, I found this fantastic old cookbook, but of course they're not dated, are they? It doesn't say who published it. You'll find it in John Hoyle. So it's a really good way of working out a timeline of old books, whether they're on your shelves or someone brings in. I use it a lot. The other side of that, again, it's sort of a timeline of cookery, but this is a really fun book. I think this could happily be on any library bookcase. It's full of nostalgia, it's full of fun. It's a timeline of Australian food. There's also a blog that goes with it from Jan O'Connell. It's very easy access. And, she's going through literally year by year the different innovations, whether it's from Vegemite through to the first pineapple in Australia, and she starts, I think she starts in 1864. There's a reason for that I'll get to in a second. But her blog, I think, goes right back to 1788. So a lot of your food favourites and things that have disappeared, you'll find in here. So it's a very accessible, good fun trip down memory lane for many of us. The reason it starts in 1864 is the very first Australian published cookbook dates to 1864. It was called The English and Australian Cookery Book by an Aristologist, who we now know was Edward Abbott. And he wrote his book for the many and the upper 10,000. It's almost a shame not to have that extra tagline on the cover, but it is available in facsimile version, and it's quite esoteric. He was a very entertaining writer. There's no pictures in here, but there are some, really fun little anecdotes and quotes. And of course, he has a wonderful time. Whenever anybody on the radio or talks about this book, they talk about the slippery bob, which is kangaroo brains cooked in emu fat. It's good wear after lunch, isn't it? But there's a lot more to it than those kind of quirky things. And the little anecdotes that come along the way are half the fun of reading it. It could also fascinate people. This is a facsimile version about, really compare that to a cookbook today. It's all words and quite small type. So as a publishing evolution, it's good for us to know how perhaps our grandmothers didn't cook boring recipes, but perhaps they looked boring because there were no pictures. So that is now available in paperback as well, so it's very accessible. And whether people are reading it for historical value or for sort of quirkiness, it has a lot of appeal. So I'd highly recommend that one. Tell me if I'm racing through too quickly or how our time's going. Good to think. It was said a long time ago that food should not only, what was the name of that last one again? The English and Australian Cookery Book by Edward Abbott. But Rachel will send out my skeleton list for you in the next day or so. So good to think. There are a lot of books that I think are not necessarily, they usually have recipes in them, but they're about food or they're about cooking. But they also take a much broader look at food and what influences it, what types of food we eat, and either the impact of that or the reality of that. I'm sure I don't need to introduce this book to any of you. I'm sure that it has been well publicised. It's won Premier's Awards and Prime Minister's Awards. I think it was the head of the book list for Parliament a couple of years ago when they started that idea. And it's not a food book, it's not a recipe book, but it is really talking to Australians and people from around the world about rethinking what food meant and was in this country before settlement. It's an absolute must read, I think, for every Australian, and I think it's now on the curriculum. I'm not sure, so I'm sure you have copies of it, but I think it's important to see it as part of the food context and the way we label things like agriculture, like farming, like cooking, and like cuisine. And too often we say that they were European innovations that were brought here, and Bruce Pascoe really debunks that myth. A more contemporary approach to that is John Newton's Oldest Food on Earth. He's also written another one called The Getting of Garlic. Again, very approachable. He's a journalist, so he knows how to write for people. I do have a couple of caveats. I don't necessarily agree with his thesis, if you like. He's saying that that it's really about Australians' approach to native foods and how we have ignored them and rejected them unfairly. But then he takes a very strong political stance in saying that that is a reflection on the way we have also approached Aboriginal people and credited them, I suppose, which is partly true, but I think it needs a lot more unpacking. But it is a very accessible book, and anybody interested in native foods, it's a must read. And there's a companion book of recipes. So if people are more interested in cooking with the foods rather than finding out about them and our responses to them, they're a really good little companion set. Told you I'd rip through them. I've got a couple more, but I'll stick to the Australian ones. And we haven't got the cover of this one. So This is Gay Bilson's Plenty. Version I have has a beautiful cover with a bird's nest on it, or that bowl. The paperback copies often have that cover there. Gay Bilson was a restaurateur in Sydney. She and her husband set up one of the first sort of French restaurants in the 1960s. It was a bit alternative. Tony Bilson was her husband's name. They separated along the way, but this is really, I guess, a cook's reflections on food. There are some wonderful recipes in it, but they are chef's recipes. They're usually at volume, so you have to pare them back. But it was probably the first time I read a food book, probably other than Elizabeth David, that took me to places particularly Australian places. I think I'd read it in overseas books, but I hadn't read it in Australia. And I'm just looking for page 175. You know, one of the chapters in here is about charcoal and charcoal being made. And it says, you know, so we're cooks, we have stoves. We don't really think about, we just turn on the gas, we turn on the electricity. We light the barbie. But she really takes us back to the earth. So she says, Stan Menz's hands are thick with calluses and charcoal dust, the kind of grime you associate with the Industrial Revolution and bleak labour in Victorian times. To watch him making charcoal is to slip back a century or more, except for the odd and trivial anachronism like the old station wagon he keeps on the land and the generator he keeps in the vehicle. You know, it really is talking about people who have maintained traditions, and I guess you could call it slow food maybe, but it really, coming from an ex-chef, I think what she's doing is saying, I might be the cook, but so many other people have contributed to this meal. So she really is looking at the breadth of what constitutes food on our plate. I've got one here called The Ethical Omnivore, which is quite a new book from an ethical butcher in Sydney, Feather and Bone. They've made quite a name for themselves, but their whole thesis is about, you know, you can eat meat, but anything we consume, doesn't matter it was meat or vegetables or a vegan diet, it really should be good for the planet and good for the earth. And of course, there's the omnivore's dilemma, Michael Pollan, again, which really talks about, both these books are talking about the ethics and politics of food and the impact of our voracious appetite, if you like, on the planet. So there is there's a big movement out there for mindful eating, for sustainable eating, sustainability. And, you know, there's a raft of books out there, but that's an example, I guess, of Michael Pollan's American. And I think the problem there is much greater than it is here, but, you know, we're nipping them at the heels. We're catching up. So look, especially for a lot of young people, that's a really, really important part of eating trends. And I know, you know, again, they want to read around the topic. It's about soil health. It's about all those sort of things. It's not just what goes on the plate. That's quite deep brain food for some people. Who books, biographies. Now, I've got a kind of odd selection, I suppose. He's not Australian, he's American, but there's a Mark Kalansky. This book's called The Big Oyster. I learnt more about New York from this history book about the role of oysters in New York than I have from anything else I had read. And when I went to New York, I'd been there a couple of times as sort of a backpacker and things. When I went back a few years after reading this, I approached Manhattan Island in a totally different way. So he's written many books about the history of cod, salt, all sorts of things. Again, he's talking about global histories. He's talking about how food has driven migration, how it's driven, yes, cod, how it's driven migration, how it's driven colonisation, how it's driven trade, global trade. It really is a fantastic, I wouldn't have sat down and read an economic history. If someone said, oh, you're going to do economic history, I'd be, oh, no way. But reading about these commodities gives us a fascinating insight into sort of geopolitics and, you know, the way that the globe has been shaped as people have found ways to sustain themselves in really quite sometimes hostile environments. So all of his work I can't recommend highly enough. You don't have to be a foodie to like them. There are many, because I work so much in 19th century food, there are many biographies of 19th century cooks. So Isabella Beeton, for example, but the one I particularly like, and if you have any Dickens fans, this book should really belong on your Dickens shelf. I know you've got your Dewey System, but can they occupy 2 spots? This book is called Dinner for Dickens. It is an academic work, but it's highly approachable. But people often might not know that Dickens' wife published a book of menus called What Shall We Have for Dinner? So the author of this biography has looked at those recipes, but also looked at food culture at the time and really sort of talking about, it's really a biography about the Dickens, but told through food. So any Charles Dickens fan, that's a must read. I had to buy it online and I seem to remember it wasn't cheap, but it might be, that was quite a long time ago. It might be more accessible now. And also the actual little menu book, What Should We Have for Dinner? You can buy sort of facsimile copies quite cheaply. And they'd be good. I mean, it's sort of republished in here in part as well, but they're really quite fun to look at the way menus were constructed in the 19th century there. What other biographies did I have? There are also many biographies about chefs that I didn't bring along with me, but I know Artemis Cooper's biography of Elizabeth David is a fabulous read if people are interested in her. Cooking for Kings, which is about the French chef Carême, who cooked for the regent, King George IV, he became, is a fascinating insight into French-English relations around the 18th century and in that sort of Regency, Jane Austen period. So, you know, biographies, they can be about cooks or about food themselves, you know, like the oyster. Contemporary books, I've got 5 minutes. Does that include question time? Oh, what shall I do? Ask questions? Quick. Okay, I know, okay, I'm going to just talk about this one. I brought a few current books. This is a new book. It's written by the family who runs Afghani restaurant in Adelaide. It's great to see them getting some national profile, but this is what I would call it's got dozens of recipes in it, but really it is a history of a family who fled Afghanistan. That we hear a lot about Afghanistan in the press, but this gives us a really personal insight about this family's history. It's personal stories, and again, you know, sort of told through the kitchen, and it's beautifully put together, and it's very, very cookable. And I think getting a sort of story about Afghanistan from an Australian, people who have lived in Australia and understand what Australians see about their country, you know, it's a memoir as well. And I think going back to that concept that I started with about, you know, who needs recipes these days, or who needs cookbooks these days, because everyone's going straight to the internet. Or who needs recipes, because, you know, we're going to have intelligent kitchens eventually that tell us what to buy and what to cook and how to cook it. Does that mean the life of the cookbook is limited? And I, you know, like the map, like the Gregory's book for our maps, we're all got GPSs. I think that's an important question to leave ourselves with as libraries. But I also think that you can't just say they're going to be replaced, because a cookbook is not just a book of recipes. It's a book about culture. So perhaps I should leave it on
that note, and there might be questions.
A couple of questions. So nobody's asking for the recipe for Slippery Bob. Surprises there. I was actually asked to do some radio on the library's early cookery books only a couple of weeks ago, and they specified, can you please talk about the yucky thing? So I'm guessing that was what they were wanting.
Yeah, that or the kangaroo steamer.
So do you think some of these books, as well as being on library shelves and being really great titles to suggest to readers, do you think some of them would work well for book club?
Oh, that's a good suggestion. Look, I certainly think something like Poana could be, or the ones that talk about ethics could be, only because they relate to contemporary. I mean, they're about food, but they talk about contemporary issues in contemporary society. It depends on your book club, you know. But if your book club reads Dickens and Jane Austen and things like that, books about food from that era can actually sort of open their world up as well.
And I know that, and everyone knows now that you're not so enamoured with the celebrity chef, but for people who like to watch over reading, are there particular chefs that you think are better to watch?
Yeah, look, I've probably been unkind about celebrity chefs. I think sometimes it becomes more about their celebrity than about their cooking. Look, Ottolenghi I use Ottolenghi. He's probably the only cookbook I really do actually cook from, because it's food that sort of doesn't necessarily come naturally to me. It's not from my food culture. Look, I think, you know, like Nigella's books and Jamie's books, and if you're going to have recipe books, because people want the recipe, you usually find they work because they've been published by, they are published for popular culture, and so they've been tested. So a lot of the Murdoch books and things that are out now, actually Poana brought, I think, both these two out. I know they've tested the recipes before they publish them. But also those chefs, those celebrity chefs, look, they have a cast of thousands working around them, coming up with new recipes all the time. Most of the recipes aren't new. They relate to some of these more original books, you know, like Claudia Roden's Middle Eastern Cookbook or Elizabeth David's, but they are written for modern cooks. And if it's the difference between someone who isn't really a natural cook and isn't really confident about cooking, sometimes celebrity is the best way in. And if it's going to get them into the kitchen and making something from scratch, then that's it's done its job. You know, I don't want to be a food snob about it. I think the more that people do cook for themselves and learn to really enjoy it, the better we will all be. So if celebrity is the way you come in first up, then go for it.
Okay, well, that I think is all we have time for. We are right on 3:15. This is Jackie's bread and butter, but it's obvious that she spent a phenomenal amount of time trying to curate lists. She was talking to me a lot about doorways and how to group books for everybody today, and how to make a lot of new titles make sense and fit neatly on your shelves in your libraries. So we're going to get that list to you soonish. But in the meantime, please thank Jackie Newling for all her time and talent today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to open the breakout rooms so people can discuss the next set of questions. Yep, doing that now.
Good afternoon and welcome back. If you missed the last session, my name is Rachel Franks and I'm the Coordinator of Scholarship here at the State Library. So I am coming to you from Gadigal land, and with me this afternoon for our final keynote of today is Dr. James Boyce. Now, some of you will know his name and you'll know his work. He's a very well-regarded historian who is based in Tasmania, but we snatched him at the State Library of New South Wales when he applied for a fellowship. So he's been up here and doing wonderful things with our collection and also doing wonderful things with us, including allowing me to rope him in to talk history with all of us this afternoon. So we're going to work it the same way we did for Jackie. James got very excited when he did his list. So there are a few books to go through, but I've started working on a list. We'll pop that up on the wiki next week. So if you miss a title, don't fret, that information will be available. And if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll come to them very soon. So here is James.
Hello everybody, I hope this is coming through loud and clear from Sydney. It's a real pleasure to be talking about history books, a subject obviously of great interest to me, but particularly I think pertinent to our day. I mean, I think to deal with the challenges of this day, to open our imaginations as to what's possible in the future, we do need to understand the past, and Australians are needing to engage seriously with the past. And we're very fortunate that there's actually been a renaissance in Australian history writing in the last couple of decades, and there's such a wealth of not just good scholarly material, but good written material that's accessible to all. There's scores of historians now who are writing books not just for each other, and I mean, I fully confess that academic historians have fallen for that trap too often, to be writing for each other, but there's a whole cohort of people who are fine writers and they're writing for the Australian community. They're trying to give Australians their story. And so anything that you folk can do in your sacred task of helping introduce Australians to their own story, you've got a wealth of resources, and we're just going to sort of touch on a few of those today. So the books I'm going to be talking about are just Australian history. There's a bias to to colonial history, mainly because that's my field. I've got one or two others, but I know much more about the 19th century. And they're all books that are scholarly books in the sense that they're all academically respectable, well-researched, empirical books where the hard yards of research has been done, but they're written for a general audience. They're written in a narrative style. They're accessible to anybody who's interested in the subject. So look, without any talk, because as Rachel said, I did select quite a few, so I better start. But I just thought, having made a few comments about Australian history over the recent decades, a great overview of of the main fields of Australian historical research over the last few decades, and some of the main historians, is Tom Griffith's new book. Well, it's out a couple of years. That's showing up, I think? Yeah. That's how it looks to everybody else. Oh, yes, it's showing. Great. Rachel's showing me that it's looking, yeah. So that's The Art of Time Travel by Tom Griffiths. Tom's a fine writer, emeritus professor of Australian history from the ANU. He's now retired. So this is a book about historians and their craft, and he goes through, it's chapter by chapter on a significant Australian historian, but he also talks about, really in the context of each of those historians, the themes that have been looked at now in Australian history, where Australian history is now, where it's come from over the last few decades. So I highly recommend that book. It's a pleasure to read. Tom's a beautiful writer, and it'll give any reader a good introduction to where Australian history is at and where it's come from. this book has only been out about 2 weeks, the next one I'm going to talk about. In fact, it's a bit of a shame because, as you know, in the libraries, the cover gets taken off. Sorry. But Rachel's apologising, but you'll see it in any bookshop, any bookshop near you. Return to Uluru by Mark McKenna. Mark's a professor of history at University of Sydney, but his books are also highly accessible to a general reader. And Return to Uluru, I think people who've never read history before, this is a great book to start. Really encourage people. It's the story of a killing of an Aboriginal man by the Alice Springs police constable in the early 1930s, and there was a Commonwealth Commission of Inquiry and all sorts of processes. The Aboriginal elder was actually killed in a sacred site at Uluru. It's an incredibly, moving story, but with the connections resonating through to the present. There's trying to uncover the story. It's a very human story. Mark meets with the family of the constable, the living relatives, as well as the family of the dead man. So it's a sort of story of the past, looking at the evidence, but also a story of the present. And it's hard to put it down, put it like that. It's the sort of book you pick it up and you read it like a fine historical novel, except it's not a novel. It's actually fine historical scholarship. So I highly recommend Return to Uluru by Mark McKenna, and you won't miss the cover. It's got a beautiful book design as well. And I was going to mention, most of Mark's books are wonderful, but in terms of regional history, some of you will know he's looking for Blackfellas Point, and that's southern New South Wales, where it's actually Mark's got a block of, lives down there, and he's writing about his homeland. And a lot of regional history, the best regional history, I think, can really help people connect with a lot of, sometimes big national histories or global histories are all a bit removed. But when we're writing about our own place, the land that we love and care for, the best historians, I think, do that in a way that illustrates these larger global themes. And Mark's looking for Blackfellas Point, which is a history of his particular area in southern New South Wales, is a prime example of that. Another prime example of that is someone well known in the State Library here, and another highly regarded academic historian who writes for a general, whose books are accessible to everyone, is Grace Carskins, Professor Grace Carskins, University of New South Wales. Grace is just an extraordinary writer, and I hope you all know this book, The Colony. It's a history of early Sydney, but it's a history of early Sydney that like it's never been written before. It's just a landmark in Australian history. I think we'll still be referring to the colony in 50 or 100 years' time. It's really changed the way the first few decades of early Sydney were seen. The encounter with the environment, how settlers were actually changed, by especially the convict settlers, the transformative impact of this land, but also the depth of its engagement with Aboriginal history, the encounter between the British and Aboriginal people, the reimagining of early Sydney as very much also becoming an Aboriginal town as well as a British town. This cross-cultural encounter that happened here was quite extraordinary. And so the Colony is a book that you should definitely be encouraging as many people as you can to read. Grace has got a newer book as well. I think The Colony's probably nearly 10 years ago now. But her book that's just out in the last couple of years, or even last year, was it last year? Time goes, 2020, it was only 2020, isn't it? 2020 seemed to go on for a very long time, didn't it? People of the River. Oh, this is good. It's a paperback, so you can see the cover this time. People of the River it's in the tradition of the colony, in the sense, again, it's about the engagement of, I mean, these mainly former convict settlers who settled, who moved in up the Hawkesbury Nepean, and the sort of way of life that was built there. But also, again, central to the story is Aboriginal people, the colonists' encounter with them, but also their adaptation, not just resistance, but accommodation, the sort of cultural meeting as well as conflict. It's a very, very rich history. And again, not just, I mean, obviously for people from the Hawkesbury Nepean, it's particularly pertinent, but again, in the best of regional history, it sort of speaks to much wider themes that are relevant to every Australian. Staying with early Sydney, Inga Clendinen's Dancing with Strangers. It's been out, it's a slightly older book, but it's got a new edition with an introduction by yours truly, actually. But Inga passed away a couple of years ago. But those of you who haven't read her writing, I'd really encourage you to do so. She's one of the most gifted Australian historian as a writer for the last few decades. Such a beautiful writer. Her essays and her books are so accessible to I mean, they're just, apart from the history, they're a pleasure to read. She stands alone, you know, really preeminent, I think, just in terms of her writing ability, but a fine scholarly historian as well. And this book, Dancing with Strangers of early Sydney, justly won a number of literary awards. And while we're on, Inga, I just thought I should, because people will sometimes, especially students, might come in. I mean, I know in some of the curriculums, this whole question of what is history, what is the difference between history and fiction, the whole history wars and cultural wars, these are subjects that are themes that are being explored at schools and universities. And Inga's The History Question, Who Owns the Past? It was a quarterly essay from making sure we're still there. Not sure if you're here. Are we all okay? Yeah, I think we're back. We're back. Okay. Yeah, of course, the Secret River. I mean, many of your people who come into the library would have read the Secret River, and so the People of the River is set in the same time, same place. So it'll sort of be it's a way of introducing people to that book. I thought I should, because. Staying with the regional New South Wales, Mark Dunn, who again is well known at the State Library here and did a scholars talk, I think, from the State Library quite recently. He's written The Convict Valley, which is focused on Newcastle and the Hunter Valley, and really the sort of a story that's hasn't been told in that area of the convict settlement and former convict settlement and interaction with Aboriginal people. Again, I'd recommend The Convict Valley. Another young Australian historian who's also a fine writer from Sydney, again, Bedlam, James Dunk. And again, this is a book that many people, accessible to a general readership. Bedlam at Botany Bay is about how early madness and mental illness is understood in New South Wales. So it's full of interesting stories, but very pertinent to today as we're dealing with a mental health crisis, really, and how we're going to how we're understanding mental health, and so many people dealing with anxiety and other mental health conditions. And so this is a fine book about giving us some history and context to that. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of general histories now, because this is there's a number of sort of general histories of Australia that I'm sure you'd have in the library. My pick of them all would be Alan Atkinson's The Europeans in Australia. It's a 3-volume series. Alan was the Professor of History up at the University of New England in Armidale. He's now over in Perth. But The Europeans in Australia, the 3 volumes, it's just such scholarly brilliance, but it's also very well written and just incredibly interesting, and surprising in its insights. I think the title has put some people off because it implies it's, ignoring, just on a superficial reading, as if it's ignoring Aboriginal history. It certainly is not. I think in a way the title is trying to be honest that this is, if you like, white fella history, but Alan's fully cognizant of it occurring in the context of Aboriginal Australia, and the Aboriginal presence and the response to Aboriginal people it runs right through the series. So yeah, I highly recommend Alan's book series. Another new book, another book that had, I suppose, the misfortune in some ways of coming out in 2020. Having had myself come out in 2020, it came with its own struggles. But What the Colonists Never Knew, A History of Aboriginal Sydney. So Peter Reid, who's been doing work on Aboriginal history for decades now, that some of you will know, has joined with Dennis Foley, Aboriginal man, to write this sort of alternative history, I suppose, of Sydney from an Aboriginal perspective. I've just been reading that in the last couple of months, and I definitely recommend that to you. Another book that came out, I'm pretty sure this is 2019, surely not 2020 as well. No, 2018, here we go. I hope some of you will have come across Deep Time Dreaming by Billy Griffiths. Billy's actually Tom's son, and equally, the writing gene was passed on in that family. A wonderful book. It's been highly praised and sort of getting shortlisted in all sorts of awards. It tells the story of, it's been remarkable how, it's only in the 60s that I think, we thought the human occupation of this continent went back about 4,000 years. It's just it's gone further and further. These archaeological discoveries keep pushing us back, right into deep time, to the point where what Aboriginal people have always said, well, we've always been here, is starting to look more and more true. And Billy documents this sort of archaeological discovery process and the sort of fraught relationship often between archaeologists and local Aboriginal communities, and the whole sort of evolving ethics of the profession. But just this sort of discovering this, sort of our eyes opening to what the extraordinary ancient history of this continent, as one archaeological discovery after another sort of just pushed the bounds of knowledge. And it's really all happened in our lifetime, or my lifetime anyway. I can't really see you all, but I'm sure there's you're not all as old as me. But it's a wonderful book, and again, totally accessible to any reader. But there's lots of human stories there too. The archaeologists become human beings, and the Aboriginal people they're working with become a human being. They're so it's storytelling as well, not just sort of abstract theorising. I thought I'd better mention my fellow historian, a fellow Tasmanian, Henry Reynolds, given he is by far and away the most famous Tasmanian historian, a sort of legend really of Australian history in the last 4 or 5 decades, our Henry Reynolds. This is not one of his most recent books, but it's my personal favourite, and I think it might be a personal favourite of a lot of people, because I think it's Henry's best-selling book. Why Weren't We Told, which is a sort of personal memoir in many ways about his discovery of, he spent most of his working life up in Townsville in James Cook University. You know, he knew Eddie Mabo, and he knew the local Aboriginal community and got to know their stories, and really had his mind opened, and then began research into the extent of frontier violence in Queensland. He started doing that research in the 70s and started writing about it in the 80s. And as you know, has become probably the name most associated with getting the message out there about the truth of the frontier. But this is his personal story about how he came to sort of be interested in in this and have his eyes opened, but also how our eyes weren't open. You know, how a lot of this stuff was known in the 19th century. How a lot of it wasn't new, but we've actually had to rediscover a lot of this. And so anyway, it's a highly accessible book, and it stands the test of time, and I recommend it. But I should mention that Henry's got, of course, he's got many other books, including a brand new one, which is, I've got at home, but I haven't read yet. Let me just, some of you will know the name. It's in the bookshops at the moment. Oh yes, History, Sovereignty and the Uluru Statement. So it's only been out for a couple of months, or maybe even less, maybe it's only a month. His previous book, Forgotten War, is also well worth a read. That's a real overview of the fighting that went on in Australia. And Henry believes, as many other historians do, that this frontier conflict really should be remembered as another one of the wars that Australia's participated in. You know, it should be part of the war memorial. There should be recognition of this on a national scale. I just thought I'd mention quickly this book that Henry did with another wonderful historian, Marilyn Lake, drawing the global colour line some years ago, won the Prime Minister's Literary Award. And it gives an introduction to that really terrible racial thinking that enveloped the whole Western world, but in particularly Australia in the late 19th and early 20th century, where we really defined our nationhood around whiteness. And this talks about, this book gives a bit of an overview of what was going on in the late 19th, early 20th century around the time of Federation, and you know, especially the sort of contentious issues up in the North Queensland, and how race got mixed up with national identity and all those questions. But again, it's very readable. Now here's a book I suspect few of you will have heard of, because I'd never heard of it, even though it came out some years ago, again over a decade ago. But I didn't hear about it at the time, and I haven't seen a lot of, 2013. But I was blown away with this book when I just happened to come across it last year. And so I thought I'd share it with you, because I just think it deserves to be better known. It's called A Town is Born. It's the Fitzroy Crossing story. So Fitzroy Crossing up in the Kimberley, a place which has really been at the front line, I suppose, of dealing with all the challenges and questions of Aboriginal communities in the Fitzroy was populated by Aboriginal people who were kicked off the stations after equal pay came in the late 60s and early 70s, and station owners were removing these Aboriginal camps, and people were becoming yet again dispossessed in their own country, and Fitzroy Crossing town camps formed. And there's sort of a whole lot of community organising has gone on since then. And it's a story of facing around, but also a story of hope, because there's been some amazing things happen there as well. Steve Hawke's actually the son of Bob Hawke. Steve, when Bob was Prime Minister, was hanging out in Fitzroy Crossing as a community worker and really doing serious and wonderful work living with the community. So I recommend that book. just a general book on Aboriginal Australians still. I still think Aboriginal Australians by Richard Broome, which stays in print. I noticed this one's the 5th edition. So it's been around for a while, but it's still you know, well worth recommending to readers. You can recommend people with confidence. Oh yes, Rachel's worried about my pile. I think it might fall over. I better start a new pile here. We don't want to crash going through the screen. Oh yes, I thought I should do a couple of more recent ones, because it's always good for people to realise, as you start to get older, you realise you start to get part of history. And so it's a part of the maturing process, isn't it? Suddenly people are writing history books about events you can remember. That's certainly, I think, one of those sort of points in our lives. And there's been a couple of excellent ones recently. So we've got Michelle Arrow, who's also another Sydney-based historian and a fine writer. She's written one on the 70s. So, yeah, I think you'll have plenty of people come into the library who are interested in the 70s. And I think they'll enjoy reading Michelle's fine book for another angle on a period they'll remember. Even if it means that you can disagree and argue with the historian, you can say, oh, that's not how I remember it. I mean, you know, get the conversation going. And the 80s, gosh, can you believe there's a history book written about the 80s? It's getting very uncomfortable, isn't it? But what a terrific book it is. Frank Bongiorno, an ANU professor of history, but it's a highly readable tome. So the 80s by Frank Bongiorno, people I'm sure will enjoy it. It's even got popular music and all sorts of information of popular culture that will be of broad interest. Now, Rachel said I shouldn't tell you this, but I'm going to confess it to you. I haven't actually read this one. But it's on my immediate to read list. So I thought I'd mention it, because I feel ashamed I haven't read it, and so should you all, because it was one, just, you know, it's been so highly praised and by such a range of people that I respect, that I'm really looking forward to reading it. Claire Wright, wonderful Melbourne-based historian, who some of you will have heard of, again, who very much committed to getting stories out to a general readership. The Forgotten Rebels of Eureka, as you might guess, if you know Claire's work, is about the rebels we don't remember. So everyone knows about the men, but how many people know about the women at Eureka? So Claire this won the 2014 Stella Prize, and I think, you know, 19th century history in Australia is still a bit Boise, both in terms of the historians and in terms of the subject matter. And so that's part of the correction of that. Another book that's part of the correction, History of Australian Feminism, so very pertinent to the last few days. We really feel like we're living through history at the moment, don't we? What's happening right now. And so Marilyn Lake's book, I think, is a good resource for people wanting to understand some of the origins of where we are, and also the proud history in this country of activism by women, which is not celebrated nearly enough. I mean, Marilyn rightly is concerned that why aren't these stories, these extraordinary stories of, like, you know, being the first, you know, getting women winning the right to vote decades before they did in the UK. You know, we have women, we forget that most European countries and Britain itself aren't granting women the right to vote till after the First World War. But winning the right to vote here in Australia from the early 1890s, and by federation, every colony has it. And that's not as a result of chance, that's a result of activism. And you know, the same with a range of social reforms to benefit women was a result of this strong women's movement in Australian history. And yet, because of the dominance of military history, and I mean, it's not putting down the sort of Anzac stories, but it is extraordinary, you know, how much of our history, our national story, is defined by sort of military, by soldiers, by the Anzac legend. Why aren't these sort of stories also equally part of who we are? You know, this fight for democracy, fight for women's rights, you know, leading the world in social reforms, in terms of age pensions and other things. This, you know, Australia was a progressive country, and that should be part of our story. And the history of the women's movement here should be part of our story as well. So Marilyn Lake's getting equal. I hope the sales are going through, having a big bounce right at the moment. Oh, and Marilyn and Henry also actually wrote a book about the Anzac legend as well, by the way, a sort of critique of it, not a sort of just a put down of it, but a sort of look at it and a review of it. And I recommend that as well. Geoffrey Blainey is a very famous Australian historian that most of you will have heard of, Tyranny of Distance and a whole series of books. He did become quite controversial for a while, in the 80s because of his views on Asian migration, and he's got caught up in culture wars and history wars, and some of his more recent books aren't nearly as well researched as some of his earlier books. He continues to be prolific into his 80s, but his best books were fine history. This is my favourite, Black Kettle and Full Moon. Black Kettle and Full Moon it's just full of fascinating stories that Geoffrey collected over his whole life about that will be a real interest to lots of people. Just sort of, I mean, the last session I know was on cooking. I mean, Geoffrey talks about things like stoves and cooking and you know, the introduction of ice and all sorts of, he right through his historical career, he kept little tidbit of notes of, oh, isn't that interesting, you know, about just how people lived. And this is full of those sorts of anecdotes. And he's such a natural writer that it's a pleasure to read. I've got Don Watson here. I mean, many of you all know Don. He writes many essays and articles. He's the former speechwriter of Paul Keating and just a wonderful writer. But he was also an academic historian back in the 80s, and Caledonia Australis, which I haven't got here, but a wonderful book, which was about the colonisation of East Gippsland, but by the dispossessed Highlanders of Scotland. So it's a mixture of Scottish history and Australian history, and you have the tale of the dispossession of the Highlanders from Scotland, and then those people dispossessing the Aboriginal people of East Gippsland, and you know, this sort of fraught, fascinating book, wonderful book. And then you might have heard more recently his book, The Bush, that came out a few years ago. Don's book, a wonderful book. But I was going to mention specifically today, because it hasn't been, I don't think it's had the attention it deserves, A Single Tree, which came out after the book. It's actually an anthology, just came out a few years ago. It's Voices from the Bush. And it's an anthology of all this writing, of a collection of writing that Don's collected. You know, there's over 100 little extracts of writing going right back to the beginning of European colonisation through to the present day, just of different writers, either in their private correspondence or in published works, reflecting on what it means to live here. So reflecting on the encounter with this land and its people. And I think it's wonderful. I mean, I get such pleasure out of it. Often before bed, I'll just read a little one. You know, there's such a range. So I recommend it. I think it's a good book to have in the libraries. And I realise it's sort of, I don't know, every now and then really good books seem to just sort of get overlooked, hard pass, and that seemed to be one of them. Bit embarrassing now, but I couldn't resist mentioning my own books just in case. Even though I'm attached to the University of Australia, I am actually make my living from writing. And so one of the things you learn as a when you make a living from writing is you never miss an opportunity just to show a book cover, but it hasn't got the cover. That was my first book, Van Diemen's Land, which is a little bit a very modest version of Grace Karskens, but perhaps in the tradition of that, about the first 50 years in Tasmania and the former colonist engagement with base. But again, a sort of a book that I would hope anyway, when you engage deeply with regional history, you sort of open up more universal themes. And a book that's a bit more pertinent to the moment, perhaps 1835, which is about the founding of Melbourne. Some of you might have heard about this very, very exciting initiative in Australian history that the Victorian government announced last week, where there's going to be a sort of Truth and Justice Commission process that goes on for the next few years. First time in Australia we've had it. The New Zealanders, South Africans, Canadians have all had this process to sort of really examine what the impact of colonisation has been from the start through to the present day, this sort of truth-telling process. And I am just so blown away, or just so moved, excited, whatever the word is, that this has started here. And I don't think it's a bad thing that it starts in a state rather than nationally, because I think if it's when we talk about what happened in our own homes, which is why I've given you a number of regional histories today. So I think when people are exposed to history of a land which they know, which is their home, which they love and engaged with, and when they hear about the history of that place, that particular place, that touches us in a way that sort of big global or big national histories often can't do. So the fact that this truth-telling process is starting in Victoria rather than being a national process at the beginning is going. I hope other states follow suit, and I hope it's a catalyst for people having more conversations about Australian history. And yes, we don't all have to agree, but let's listen to each other and see all these books really as conversational starters rather than conversational enders. I think the best history books open the questions up to a much more informed discussion rather than providing all the answers. So I think I better shut up there. So I'm not providing all the answers, and you've got some time to ask some questions.
So do you have a couple of questions? So most of these, apart from maybe the Don Watson book, are books that you would probably want to read from cover to cover. Are there any other types of books that you might suggest that people might want to just sort of dip in and out of? Maybe
most of the books I read for research, academic. There's a problem in universities that there's such a pressure on output and there's such a limited time. So there are a lot of academic histories will have content in there, but they're not always well written. all the selection I've given today, and there's many others, are drafted and redrafted and redrafted and redrafted. So chapters follow each other. So a narrative builds so that you read it from front to cover and you get the whole story, and because the general reader does that. I actually sell my books at Salamanca Market in Hobart. And when I first started doing it over 10 years ago, I was really, one of the joys for me was to discover all the range of sort of just general people, the range of people who read Australian history, and they pick up the book from the beginning and they read it to the end. The same as you, that's what ordinary readers do. But I'd got so used to an academic world in which people don't do that anymore. They haven't got time to read books like that. And when they write books, they haven't got time to sort of carefully craft it. It's almost like a series of it, and I struggle now because I know how much time it takes to get a book tight, to get it ready for a general reader. There doesn't need to be any contradiction at all between scholarly history and books that are accessible to a general reader. As Inge Clendenin always said, You know, it's insulting to a reader to dumb it down. Writing for a general reader is not about dumbing it down. It's about taking as much care as you can with the writing and not assuming knowledge. And there are books which read to me a bit like a first draft, is how I would say. And there's such pressure to get the output out there. I haven't talked about those today, but that's they're books that, you know, you look in the index and you can, but they're normally when people are doing a research project, you know, when they've got specialised interests. And as I say, I mean, there's so many fine historians now in the last few decades who are, I don't know, see it as their duty is a very old-fashioned word, but responsibility, vocation to help Australians connect with our story, you know, to give us back our story. You know, every culture, every society needs stories if it's going to understand the present, you know, and once upon a time it was done orally, people sitting around campfires passing on those stories. But human beings, to make meaning, to understand what's happening now, to sort of help imagine the future, need to have a story, just as we need it in our own family life, you know, just as we need it at an individual level, we need it at a communal level. So we've all got to, I think every historian has that responsibility, and, you know, we share in this together with you, with everybody who's bookshop owners, people in libraries, people in media. We all have a responsibility to sort of make sure that people aren't left without a story.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We are right on 4:15. James wouldn't say this, but I'm allowed to say this. So as a reviewer of a lot of history books, I can also suggest quite warmly all of James's works. He would be, I think, one of the finest writers of history that we have right now. And it's been lovely to have him here.
Thanks, Rachel.
Talking about history books, even if he made me quite anxious with the tall tower of books to his left. So please join me in thanking James for all the time he's invested in this afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, and all best wishes in your work.